So good morning, everybody. Good morning and welcome. Welcome to Luxembourg. And we're delighted to have so many of you still present with us and also joining us online for the final day of the EIB Group Forum 2026. Now, this morning we have a very important morning and we're going to focus on Ukraine's reconstruction, global gateway partnerships, and Europe's role as a reliable global partner. And of course, it is our great honor to welcome you here, Alexandra Matvichuk, who is the chairwoman of the Center for Civil Liberties, and also you're, of course, awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 2022. So without any further ado, please welcome to the stage.
Thank you very much for providing me a floor. It's a huge honor for me to address to this distinguished audience. This was the fourth winter of the large-scale invasion, and it was very difficult. Russian missiles and drones are deliberately destroying the energy infrastructure on which the survivals of civilians depends. In January and February, temperatures dropped to -25 degrees Celsius. Ukrainian cities are literally freezing. Millions of people have limited or no access to heating, water, electricity. This is happening here in Europe, right on the border with the European Union. I remember when the Russians first began striking on energy infrastructure, a photograph appeared online of a Kiev school teacher. She was wearing a red winter jacket and warm hat, standing on tiptoe beside a metal pole on which she placed her computer, right outside, somewhere near a shop where a power generator was running and there was internet access. And there, in the freezing cold, she was giving her students a lecture. And I thought the Russians came to take everything from us: our land, our freedom, our future, our children's education. And this Kiev school teacher decided to give them nothing. Even something as simple as teaching a lesson became an act of resistance. I know from my own experience, when you can't rely on international system of peace and security, you can still rely on people. We get used to thinking in categories of states and interstate organizations, but ordinary people have a much greater power than they can even imagine. Ordinary people can change history. I don't know what historians in the future will call this period, but the world order based on UN Charter and international law has been collapsed. This system was created after the Second World War to protect people from wars and mass violence, but now it's just stalling, reproducing ritualistic movements. Even my phone has an expiration date. The system has never been reformed. That is not a war in Ukraine. This is a global change in the world order that began with the seizure of Ukrainian territories. And it's easy to predict that fires like wars will emerge more and more often in different parts of the globe because this international wiring is faulty and sparkling everywhere. We will never return to the status quo. Change is the new norm. Europe has to respond to the challenges of today's world. It's a determination to act that gives society a future. First, Europe must defend freedom and democracy. Europe is less about geography than about the values of modern society. We live in a world where values have no national borders. We know from history that only spread of freedom make our world safer. Modern authoritarian regimes don't share a common ideology, but they promote common narratives. They try to convince people that democracies are weak and helpless, while autocracies are powerful and effective. And the problem is not just in fact that in authoritarian countries, the space for freedom is shrinking to the size of the prison cell. The problem is that even in developed democracies, people are starting to call into questions the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And there are reasons for this. The coming generations replaces those ones that survived the Second World War. They have inherited democracy from their grandparents. They began to take freedom and human rights for granted. They have become consumers of democracy. They perceive freedom as a possibility to make a choice between different cheeses in supermarket. And that is why they are ready to exchange their freedom for populist claims, for economic benefits, for promises of security, and first and foremost, for their own comfort. In addition to it, we have a rapid development of new technologies. People spend more and more time in digital reality, which is overloaded with fakes, disinformation, and propaganda. It's led to a situation that people start to lose their ability to make a distinguish between truth and lie. And now we have a situation when the residents of the same small community have no more a shared picture of reality. Without a shared picture of reality, people can't do common actions. Without common actions, how we can protect our freedom and democracy? This is not a chaos. This is a battle for new world order, and Europe must step into this battle, and it must do so in fundamentally different principles. Europe can play a key role in creating an international system of cooperation that brings together developed democracies and states that are on the path to democracy in different parts of the globe. This requires new and more effective models of management and security than those currently in use. We need to look not only at infrastructure, businesses, and supply chains, but also at intangible objects such as culture, education, resilience, and trust. We have to see the human beings behind the numbers and ratings. This means moving away from the traditional ideas about the role of citizens and expanding their involvement. It means taking an active position rather than a pose. Second, Ukraine makes Europe stronger. 12 years ago, millions of Ukrainians had bravely stood up against the corrupt authoritarian regime that stopped Euro-integration process. They took to the street across the country, demanding that the regime continue moving toward Europe and genuine democratic values. People fought just for a chance to build the country where the rights of everybody are protected, government is accountable, judiciary is independent, and police do not beat students who are peacefully demonstrating. And they paid the ultimate price just for this chance. The police shot more than 100 peaceful demonstrators in the center of Kiev. People died under the flags of Ukraine and the European Union. But when the authoritarian regime collapsed due to Revolution of Dignity, and Ukraine got our chance for democratic transition, in order to stop us on this way, Russia invaded. Russia occupied Crimea and part of the eastern regions of Ukraine, and 4 years ago expanded this war to the full-scale invasion. Because Putin is not afraid of NATO. Putin is afraid of the idea of freedom. And this is not just a war between two states. This is a war between two systems, authoritarianism and democracy. Putin didn't launch the full-scale invasion just in order to occupy one more part of Ukrainian land. It's very naive to think that he has lost hundreds of thousands of Russian soldiers just to occupy Avdiivka or Bakhmut, which majority of Russians couldn't even find on the map. Putin launched this full-scale invasion because he wants to occupy and destroy the whole country and move further. His logic is historical. He dreams about his legacy, Because Russia is empire. An empire has a center, but has no borders. Empires always try to expand. And that is why people in other European countries, they are safe only because Ukrainians are still resisting and holding back the Russian army. A military technological revolution is taking place before our eyes with development of unmanned systems, massive drones attacks, battlefield transparency, and mass cheap, precise, long-range weapons. In 4 years, all the military experience of the 20th century had become irrelevant. And that is why Ukraine is not just beneficiary of international support, but a strong contributor to European security. It's time to develop the security autonomy for Europe. No one behind the wall. No one is safe. Both Russian propaganda and Russian drones can easily cross the EU borders. The EU needs Ukraine no less than Ukraine needs the EU. And therefore, the EU security policy should include Ukraine as an integral part of the European security. And last, we need to rethink what it means to be European. My experience dealing with the consequences of mass violence and oppression has led me to the simple conclusion: the collapse of the world order was preceded by an ethical crisis. Because how we see the world determines our decisions and our actions. In 2022, I studied a social survey conducted in one powerful EU country. Every fourth male citizen of this country said that they would leave immediately in the event of an attack. I looked at these figures and I couldn't understand. This country has provided fairly high standards of living and social protection for its citizens, but despite this, they are not ready to defend their way of life. Ukrainians are rethinking the values of freedom and security that European societies have long taken for granted. First, for us, freedom is not just value of self-expression. Paradoxically, it is a value of survival. We would not have survived and emerged as a nation if over 3 centuries, being a shadow of Russian Empire, we hadn't stubbornly pursued freedom. Second, we don't see freedom and security as opposites. We need freedom for security and security for freedom, because when we lose one, we inevitably lose the other. Third, for us, the state is an environment for existence, not just a set of services. It is what preserves our identity. You can love something even if it's not perfect, and that's exactly why even the imperfect must be defended and preserved. And fourth, we believe that the efforts of ordinary people matter. We have never had the luxury of relying on efficient state institutions. We are an ancient nation, but pretty young state, so our vital source in the local democracy, in self-organization, in grassroots initiatives, in agency of ordinary people, and their belief that their efforts matter. Let me illustrate it with a story. I interviewed Ukrainian scholar and philosopher Igor Kozlovsky, who spent 700 days in Russian captivity. Before that, I interviewed hundreds and hundreds of people, men and women. They told me how they were beaten, raped, locked into wooden boxes, their fingers were cut, their nails were torn away, their nails were drilled, they were electrically shocked through their genitalia. One woman told me how her eye was dragged out with a spoon. So it was little that could surprise me. But Professor Igor Kozlovsky mentioned a tale which was insignificant to the evidence base, but it struck me deeply. He described how he was kept in solitary confinement, in a tiny cell, in a basement, with no window, no light, no fresh air. It was purely ventilated. It was difficult for him even to breathe. Sewage flows on the dirty floor, and through the opening of the sewage, rats were crawling down. And this well-known professor in my country told me how he gave lectures on philosophy to these rats, just in order to hear sounds of human voice. And legally, Igor Kozlovsky was a victim because he was abducted, illegally detained, kept in inhuman conditions. He was tortured so severely that he has to relearn how to walk again. But he told me that all his experience, it's not a reason for him to treat himself and to experience himself as a victim, because the basis of our existence is dignity, not victimhood. And dignity is action. So let me sum up. Believe in Ukraine. Believe in Europe. We are not hostages of these circumstances. We are participants of this historical process. And dignity provides us strength and courage to continue our fight, even in unbearable conditions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think your words will sit with all of us for a very, very long time. That they were beautiful, they were poignant, and deeply tragic at the same time. To follow on from that, and to set the scene for the panel on rebuilding Ukraine, please welcome to the stage Karl Nehammer, who is Vice President of the European Investment Bank.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. To speak after you is nearly impossible, so thank you for your great words. A round of applause again, please. Ladies and gentlemen, dear ministers, dear leaders and policy makers, dear colleagues, it's an honor to open this discussion on rebuilding Ukraine's critical infrastructure. Just days ago, we marked another solemn anniversary. During 4 years of full-scale war, Ukraine and its people have resisted Russian aggression with extraordinary resilience and courage. They defend not only their homeland, but the values of the entire European continent. The European Union stands with them, and to be clear, we stand with them, we stand with you. For the European Union, support to Ukraine is not symbolic. It is a strategic choice. In cooperation with the European Commission, the European Investment Bank has turned that choice into action. We have already mobilized significant resources for Ukraine. Since the start of the war, we have provided over 4 billion euro to energy, infrastructure, small businesses, and EU integration. 2025 has marked a record year of 1.5 billion support in new financing. In 2025, one of our main priorities was energy. Together with our partners, we helped secure the necessary gas reserves through support to Naftogaz of Ukraine. In January, the bank provided an additional support to Naftogaz on top of earlier EIB and EU financing. We have also assisted in restoring strategic hydroelectric plants and provided financing through partner banks to municipalities. Thanks to our recovery programs, EIB is actively investing in critical infrastructure. Today, we have around 500 municipal projects across the country, including Frontline regions. Our effort is to make sure hospitals can function, schools can open, and families can heat their homes in winter. Beyond infrastructure, we are strengthening EU-Ukraine business links. Our export credit guarantee facility, launched in 2025, supports EU companies exporting to Ukraine, helping revive trade and support recovery. we are now preparing a broader package of guarantees, loans, and grants. However, it's equally clear that sustainable recovery will depend on private sector-driven growth. Over time, Ukraine must shift from predominantly public financing to attracting significant private investment. The EIB Group can mobilize this investment through its mandate and experience in crowding in capital. Finally, reconstruction must follow a Build Back Better approach. The EIB Group supports full alignment with EU requirements in procurement, governance, and sustainability. Together with the European Commission and member states, we have deployed 3 major advisory programs with strong track record in helping countries prepare for EU membership and develop robust investment pipelines. Together with our colleagues of EBRD, we share a common belief that investment in Ukraine is not only about recovery. It is about building a competitive, secure, and future-ready economy. Let us this opportunity to identify practical pathways to mobilize capital and scale impact. I'm looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karl. And now welcome to the scene, please, Jana Kobzova, European Council on Foreign Relations, who's going to lead the panel discussion. And joining her on stage, we have Olga Zaykova, Deputy Minister of Finance from Ukraine, Ivan Fedorov, Governor of Zaporizhia, Greg Guyot, First Vice President, EBRD, Gert-Jan Koopman, Director General for Neighbourhood and Enlargement Negotiations at the European Commission, Alona Skrum, First Deputy Minister for Development of Communities and Territories of Ukraine, and Taras Pasajko, Chief Financial Officer at Naftogaz Group.
Don't worry, I'm not going to speak for too long. I'm going to moderate the panel. But I'll just want to say a few words. I think it's especially humbling to be speaking after Alexandra Matvichuk. I think, Alexandra, we met first in 2013 when you were providing legal assistance to victims of the police violence on Euromaidan. And I think you're an example of this quiet, calm, and very dignified strength that many of us have come to know in Ukraine and recognize in so many people. And I think that's the force that doesn't need to be loud or shout to be heard and to be powerful. And that's the force that Putin mistook for weakness. And the result of that is that his 3 days long military operation is lasting for more than 4 years. Now, of course, those 4 years have brought enormous amount of pain, and you spoke about it in a way that I think will resonate and with most of us for the rest of today and going onward. This has also been the harshest winter that since Russia has started the full-scale invasion. And I want to leave you with some numbers so you appreciate the scale when we're going to be talking about rebuilding Ukraine. In 3 months of this winter alone, Russia dropped more than 14,000 guided aerial bombs on Ukraine, more than 730 different missiles of various types, and more than 19,000 attack drones, just for context and comparison. Earlier this week, 2 drones fired by Iran at one of Qatar's LNG's facilities has knocked that facility off. Ukraine is sustaining the drone attacks on a daily basis. And the damage is horrendous, especially in human lives. There was a 12% increase in civilian casualties last year. It has been the deadliest year for civilians during the full-scale invasion since 2022. And there is also a huge damage on economy and energy. As of January 2026, Ukraine's generation capacity was half of what it used to be before the full-scale invasion, not to mention the repercussions for country's economic growth. This has been, just to make it very clear, a deliberate campaign. In other words, this is not a bug, this is a feature of the full-scale invasion that Russia is waging against against the country. What does all of that mean for Ukraine's recovery? What does it mean for its future, including for its future in the European Union, which it is set on the path? What's the damage, and how can various international partners help and assist to prevent both the next deep freeze? You spoke very vividly about the situation in Kyiv this winter. How do we make sure that that doesn't repeat next winter? And of course, the first answer is, of course, military support and deep strikes. But we have a panel that's going to discuss all the other issues apart from military. I'm glad I don't need to answer these questions. I'm here to ask, and I have a panel that's going to help me answer them. I will start with you, Ivan Fyodorov. You are the governor of Zaporizhia region, and previously you were the mayor of Melitopol, which is now occupied by Russia. Zaporizhia is a region that is also partly occupied by Russia, and the city of Zaporizhia is, of course, under sustained attacks by the Russian Federation. Could you talk a bit more about what are the needs from the frontline areas such as yours, and where do you see the international partners could help?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for to be today here and to inviting me. I represent near 1 million of citizens which now stay very close to Frontline. Zaporizhia region located 20 kilometers to Frontline, and 1 million citizens have their everyday life, of course, with many of Russians attack. For example, last 6 months, Russian attacked Zaporizhia region not less than 700 times per day. And of course, it is hard to understand here in Luxembourg, where we can't understand it, but of course, more easy to understand if you welcome to Zaporizhia. I think that for last several days, you have very greatest numbers of information. That's why I want to stop only on a few numbers and a few very important accents. First of all, now Ukraine passed the most difficult winter last tens of years. First of all, a very low temperature outside. And second, very high activity of Russian drones and rockets on Ukrainian territory. My region 4 times was on a blackout. What does it mean, blackout? Blackout, it means that when on hospital, we can't give any support for our patients, because the electricity, there is no on our networks. It means that our public transport can't work because there is no electricity on our lines. It means that our water supply company can't work and deliver water to our flats and houses because there is no electricity on our lines. And the same with the heating season. It is hard to imagine, but I think it is easy to organize in all countries if we not stop Russian in Ukraine. And of course, we need to make our home task, lessons learned for our next winter, and what we need to do to be better prepared for more and more Russians attack. It is very important for us. That's why we need to build shelters on our transformator stations. It means that we need to build a reserve generation for all our critical infrastructure. And of course, it is one of the important duty, not only of Ukraine representatives and government, but of course about our international partner. Second, our challenge, which we have now, as I said earlier, the population of the Zaporizhia region now near 1 million citizens, but what is very important, near 200,000 citizens, it's IDPs who live their houses and homes on temporarily occupied territories. And it is our duty, it is our task to give to these guys new places for life and new places for new development. And of course, it is not only a task for Ukrainian government, it is a task for all of us and for all our international partners. And last but not least, but very important, it is like a patient who needs help of doctors. If we give this support or if we give this care on time, it is It is a very big perspective that patients will be healthy. But if we don't give it on time, if we will bring some documents from one country to next country, from one floor to next floor, it means that patient will have a bad perspective. And the same situation now in Ukraine. We need very extremely fast support because we extremely fast need to be prepared to new challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the perspective from the ground. You talked about the need for speed, but the other issue is, of course, the volume and the financing. And I'm glad to turn to our next speaker, Olga Zykova, Deputy Finance Minister of Ukraine, with a simple question: where does the money come for all of this? What do you assess are the financial needs? How do you evaluate also the international cooperation with your partners? With different financial institutions, but of course the European Union and its member states, we are the major financial backer of Ukraine. And also, how do you go forward with the kind of needs that Ukraine will need for fully rebuilding once the war stops? And how does the perspective of EU membership affect those considerations?
Thank you so much. And I guess the set of the questions require a bit more time than the time frame for the panel, and to let also all the distinguished panelists also to step in with the intervention and with the discussion. I will try to be brief but very precise here. If we speak about the budget system of the country in the state of war, it appears to be still very simple. First and foremost, the focus is around defense and security sector. And for everyone to understand how we actually manage to do that, we put all the internal resources towards giving a helping hand to our military campaign. This is 60% of the budget. This is 27.2% of the GDP of such a big country as Ukraine. So you understand the magnitude and the scale of the funds that are needed in addition to this for all the important things. We proceed paying salaries to medical workers, to teachers, to pensioners. We are an aging population. We are a big population, but we still need to provide critical important social payments to the elderly, social protection payments. This gives yet another additional north of 40 billion a year within the budget where we need external financing to come. And since the start of the war, we have already attracted north of 170 billion US dollars. From the perspective of the pure analysis standpoint, the number is huge. But from the perspective of the real effect and what is critically needed, this is the minimum, because here there is also the third basket, which is the reconstruction. The reconstruction which requires not only simply rebuilding, but actually making sure that this country has the impetus and the foundation to develop. Reconstruction means the resilience put under the reform, the discipline put into the action of recovery, and our EU alignment here plays a critical role in terms of not putting this into the third basket, but actually to put it in the front line of the necessity to keep not only talking about this, but actually to understand where we can get the proper financing for this purpose. Because again, the numbers that I mentioned, this is it. This is the budget of the country in the state of war. And this does not include, by the way, all the emergency appearing, first and foremost on the battlefield, when our army requires, or the Ministry of Defense is announcing yet another package needed for strengthening the army, but also with respect to be a trusted partner, we are keen on reforms. So from the financial standpoint where we are, we have concluded the agreement with the International Monetary Fund to have the new EFF arrangement for the 4 years ahead of us, which gives quite a good anchor for the reforms and anchor for the partners' comfort zone, I would say, so that the financing that is needed to have the program fully funded is there, but at the same time, it's not a trivial exercise to attract the financing which is required beyond the budget. And this is where we need DFIs and IFIs, but also the private sector to step in a more proactive way, so that we do not miss a chance to have again the development pillar there. Recently, the World Bank issued the report on the assessment of the damages, RDNA 5. North of 500 billion ticket is unbearable for even the whole combination of all the funding available. And here in Luxembourg, you can all understand, and the markets will reflect it, that it's not simply possible to cover that, if not the reparations. So this is also a very important line that we are working on, so that Russia pays for what it does. But at the same time, we have no time. As Mr. Fedorov said rightly, we are speaking about the speed not because we want to push the partners towards, let's say, going out of the comfort zone. You are all already with us out of the comfort zone. We forgot about that already. We are speaking about the magnitude of the time squeezed. We are in the frame when we literally have the time as the luxury. Because if we do not start repairing what was damaged immediately now, while thinking of mid-term and long-term planning towards smarter rebuilding, we will not survive in this mode. And we don't want to remain in the survival mode. We want to have the assistance available so that this survival mode is transformed into the developed and modern economy under the EU partnership. And EU alignment is not simply, the topic for the discussion of big panels only. This is literally what we are stepping into the very clear path of our intention to become the EU member. And I would say that the work condition under which we walk this path actually helped us foster many things. Anti-corruption institutions basement is not an easy exercise. Fostering and improving the corporate governance in state-owned banks and state-owned enterprises, yet another task to complete. Judicial reform. So there are things that have been deeply historically enrooted as quite difficult aspects to work on. But since Russia invaded Ukraine, actually we took the moment to reflect very actively, and I would say this is how our institutional immune response actually worked out. Because as any organism, we identified the threat quickly, we had the resources accumulated rapidly towards the response, and we remember the shock, like every organism with the threat, right? Same as in biology. And we remember the shock now very well, so that any other build-up of the threat actually gives us a very clear, stronger response towards the threat. So it's not, self-incorporated. This reaction, this resilience reaction, is reflected in the reforms we do, in our action strategic plans with the partners we do. Now there is a very clear coordination between the IFIs, for instance. In comparison with 2022, we have the very clear basis for comparison. By far more coordinated, more disciplined, I would say, to extent possible with very clear bureaucratic mandates, more flexible. But yes, we as the partner, not as pure consumer, would like in the future to contribute. But for this, we also need the contribution from the partners towards more flexibility in terms of the speed of the reaction towards the amounts that we see that are to be covered or the initial gaps. And yes, we have to, unfortunately, in parallel, do quick response in hand with long-term transformation planning. But I think this is the beauty of the story, that if done well, it will be a very good benchmark for many, even European countries to follow. I will stop here so that we'll follow up the discussion, but happy to have other questions to answer.
Thank you so much. I mean, when we were talking about the need for speed, I think a lot of us are kind of also realizing the April deadline for the loan that the EU is about and hopefully will provide to Ukraine rather soon. We now move on to our next panelist, Greg Guyot, who is the first Vice President of the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, which of course has been present in Ukraine for a very long time and has not departed since the full-scale invasion started, quite the opposite. From your perspective and your previous experience, how do you see the role of IFIs and institutions such as yours in supporting the Ukraine's full recovery, but also the kind of the emergency needs that both previous speakers were talking about? And where do you see the role for private sector and also for cooperation complementarities between your institution and EIB?
Well, thank you. And first, let me just say that our focus at EBRD, I think, like Carl said, for the EIB, and parenthetically, as Minister said, I think the cooperation is outstanding, and in this case, 1 + 1 equals more than 2 for sure in how we're delivering. But our focus remains on supporting the people of Ukraine and the emergency needs through the war of aggression. Last year, we deployed 3 billion euros, and we will continue to be consistent around supporting these emergency needs as the war of aggression continues. And again, I'm pleased at the close cooperation and coordination we have with the EIB, particularly, of course, some of the other IFIs, to make sure that we deliver consistently for the country and the people. But if you think about the beginning of the planning for reconstruction, which is not just about waiting until hostilities cease. I mean, it's got to start now, and we have to start working on some of the mobilization of private sector investment now. And I'd focus on 3 themes that maybe we'll develop a little bit more in the panel. The first theme, and you know, I was in Kyiv a couple of weeks ago, and I was very pleased to hear from some of the people on this panel, as well as others, the commitment to reform governance in the country, because that's the first sort of sine qua non for private sector investment in the long run. And I think some of the work that we're doing in the IFIs, bringing best practices, bringing in examples, some of our policy work with the government and the great receptivity of the government and focus on this will create the conditions for investment beginning now. We're already seeing that, but obviously into reconstruction. And here I would make a difference between sectors, for example. If you think about the energy sector, we already have a very, very substantial pipeline of private sector investment into energy, and it's not just about clean energy. Of course, it's about distributed energy generation. It's about resilience and security. And so today we probably have at least 1 gigawatt of projects in our pipeline for private sector investment into the country. And then you look at other sectors like water and transport, where we're working together to try to create the conditions for PPPs, for example, which I think will support a lot of the investment into reconstruction. So this governance reform and creating the conditions for private investment is the first thing I'd focus on. The second one, and here I think in particularly because we're the 2 European-based multilaterals, the EIB and the EBRD have a very, very big responsibility to help the country of Ukraine coordinate investment platforms, projects preparation facilities. How do we help prioritize the projects that ought to get the first focus from our public sector peers, but also the private sector, importantly. And so we're beginning to try to think about how we scale some of the very good work that's already been done during the last 4 years around project preparation and project prioritization. And then the third thing I would focus on is, I think, a role, and again, the European-based multilaterals, we should be taking the lead in this regard, using our capital and our balance sheets to catalyze, to figure out how we can take more risk, how we can be more, to use a word, aggressive in our position in the capital structure so we can crowd in more private investment. And whether you believe the number ultimately for reconstruction is 500, 800 billion or a trillion. It doesn't really matter. What's very clear in all of that is there isn't enough funds in the sovereigns and in the multilateral system to do that. We need to create the conditions by using our balance sheets in a way that provides a little bit of de-risking and credit enhancement for the private sector investors. And then alongside of that, doing our policy work and the minister said this, you know, it's fighting a war, it's investing in defense, and it's beginning all the other things. And I think we can use some of our human capital to support the government in the planning and the development of the plans to build the reconstruction programs and bring in the private sector through, you know, our catalytic capital.
Thank you so much. That was very useful, and I think we can go back to the discussion of what the private sector would need to increase that investment, not just in terms of reforms, but of course also the underlying security. We will now turn to Gert-Jan Kopman. Sorry, I'll go back to you very soon. Could you maybe, I mean, from your experience, you've been in Brussels steering much of operations of European Commission when it comes to Ukraine ever since the full-scale invasion started. Very huge role when it comes to support for Ukraine's reforms on its path to EU membership. How do you see, because that's of course the other story of the past 4 years, it's Ukraine's defense, but also it's the reform path that Kyiv has embarked on in 2013 and has paradoxically intensified since 2022. How do you see that interplay between what's happening now and the reforms? And where do you see EU's role in supporting both the reforms on its path to Ukraine's EU membership, but also the reconstruction, which of course, if we are talking from EU's position, this is an investment and reconstruction into a future EU member.
Yes, thank you very much. And I can piggyback on some of the very pertinent points made by my colleagues on the panel. I think actually we're looking at a triangle, right? I mean, the biggest driver, as my Ukrainian colleagues can testify, for the reforms in Ukraine is its EU perspective, because all of the reforms are aligned with membership. And as you know from the experience of a country like Poland, this is transformational. Poland's GDP increased threefold in just 20 years on the back of the reforms and the integration in the single market. And that's, of course, what we hope for Ukraine. Just one number. Ukraine's GDP is, roughly speaking, $200 billion. The size of the internal market, on the other hand, is $20 trillion. So if Ukraine integrates the internal market, for anyone who invests in Ukraine, the potential to sell into is increased by a factor of 100, right? So that tells you in a very simple number how important the EU perspective is. And the reforms are fundamental. They're very structured because essentially Ukraine is replacing the software running the country with the EU's rule book. We're helping them to do that. So that's the first dimension. It's absolutely critical. It's linked also, let me just as a little aside in this first point, underline the importance of the rule of law and what we call the fundamentals. It's inherently important. We listened to a very telling speech about dignity, and I think democracy, rule of law, fundamentals are essential in this regard first and foremost. But they're also critical for private sector investment because they protect property rights, they give visibility on returns. So the EU's reforms, which are anchored on the fundamentals, are also the key driver for a private sector investment. That's the first point. Second point, money is needed. We're looking at a war waged by a fascist mafia state against a democracy. That is what it is. Let me call it what it is. And that is leading to unparalleled destruction. Now, as Greg was saying, whatever the numbers are for reconstruction, they will have to come to a large extent from the private sector. But at the same time, the private sector will require significant public support. So the EU, its member states and the institutions have put 180 billion euros on the table over the past 4 years. And I agree very much with what Olga was saying. It's a huge amount of money, but it's just enough. So that's the paradox. Just another figure, I'm a numbers guy. So the IMF program to which you referred, Olga, is $8 billion over 4 years. Just these 2 years, the EU is making available 19 billion euros for military and budget support on top of the numbers that I've already mentioned. So there's a lot of public money, and I just want to say, even if it's barely enough, it's huge. The EU budget every year stands at 180 billion euros. So the Europeans are finding it hard. Everyone who's been involved with these decisions, and I think Carl has been privileged to have a lot of exposure, knows that these are not easy decisions, but they're still being taken. And I think the EU has jumped over its shadow. So sustained financial support is needed. The EU has also said for after the end of the war, we are putting another 100 billion euros through a new Ukraine facility on the table. And the third element, of course, is peace and deterrence, which is an area where the EU has played a more limited role. Ukraine is a front runner, is leading innovation in this space, and the big challenge here is how we link these two elements, the EU system and the Ukrainian system, by integrating the defense industrial systems. And I think the war that is now going on in the Middle East shows in a very graphic manner how important it is to have a part of our system in Europe that is capable of withstanding modern onslaught generated by drones. So that's the third element, and we need to continue to invest in it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will not let you go without asking one more question, because you of course lead the Director General for Neighborhood and Enlargement negotiations. And thank you for sharing the numbers. I think this is the numbers crowd, and it helps us understand just the scale of what's needed. Could you maybe comment a bit on how the negotiations on Ukraine's EU membership are going now? Because it's such a fundamental thing, not just for people who see Ukraine as part of the EU, but also for the framework for any potential investment, as you were saying.
Yes, so the negotiations have actually moved forward dramatically rapidly, despite the war and despite the fact that we have, unfortunately, one member state that finds it hard to formalize it, to put the formal stamp on it. But the reality is that effectively this month, we will have materially, I underline the word materially, not formally, but materially, come to a point where we have opened, sorry to use this technical jargon, have opened all of the negotiation clusters. So that, is something that we, in other candidate countries, normally took a few years for. This was done super rapidly. And the timelines that are being looked at with the Ukrainian government for actually undertaking the reforms and then closing the negotiations, those timelines are also very ambitious. I have to add, they stand or fall with Ukraine's ability to continue to reform. And what we see is that the country, maybe Alona can comment on it, in the past few months is finding it more difficult to reform. But the negotiations, even if Hungary has not signed off on them, materially have advanced extremely rapidly, as if all the formal paperwork had been completed.
Thank you so much. And that's why I wanted to kind of go to Alona Shkrum now. You're the first Deputy Minister for Development of Communities and Territories of Ukraine. But of course, you're of the generations of Ukrainians who stood on the streets of Kyiv in 2013, then joined the parliament ranks, forming the group of Euro-optimists, if I remember correctly. So how optimistic are you about Ukraine's European future? But also, if you could go back to talking about, how the communities were affected by the war, by the destruction, how the municipal infrastructure, transit links, energy have been affected. How do you assess the scale of the damage, and where do you see the priorities for international partners to assist?
Thank you so much, Jana. It's great to be here. It's my first time in Luxembourg and in EIB headquarters and forum, so it's an inspiring opportunity, especially after all the words that were said. I see no point of not being an optimist at this situation. I think it was Churchill who said something like that at the Second World War. When the things are very bad, you can only be an optimist because it will only get better. I think we are quite at the crossroads of the world, big world changes, right? Not just with the Middle East, but with the logistics corridor, with the European future, with the world security. I think everybody starts to realize that Ukrainians realized more than 4 years ago. However, the good news are that I think that with the lessons of Ukraine using credit money, using EIB money, using EBRD money, developing projects throughout the war under bombs, under constant shellings, with blackouts. The fact that Ivan Fedorov is here today talking about how to reconstruct and rebuild the region that is constantly shelled every night and every day, and he knows how to do that, and he has already the lessons of how to do it efficiently and fast. I think it shows that a lot of lessons could be drawn from our expertise and our experience. And this is quite the point why we are here, right? I will give you the numbers because I think we are in the heart of a banking system of Europe, in the room with a lot of bankers. So I think the numbers are important in comparison to what has been done, what are the lessons, what are the needs, and how should we move forward for this year. So as Ola has said, the rapid damage and assessment needs, which was done this year for the 5th time already, RDNA 5 showed 588 billion of needs for reconstruction. What does it mean? It is 33 times more than the RDNA done in the Western Balkans after ex-Yugoslavia war. It is 10 times more than the RDNA done in Gaza sector. So it sounds, a lot. Ukraine is a big country, and Russia has been shelling, damaging, and destroying everything constantly, especially for the past year. But what does it mean in comparison to other numbers? If you compare, as Gert-Jan, you already said, the number about 20 trillion of EU internal market, right? It doesn't seem as bad or as horrifying. Also, we have 3 billion of Russian frozen assets. Difficult to get, but in comparison to 588, you can see an understanding. It is unfortunately 64 billion more than last year. So the damages and the needs for reconstruction increased by 64 billion in 1 year, 2025, and most damages recurred in 3 areas. Energy, and I think we all understood that, but the numbers, they do not lie, they are very precise. Logistics and transport, and this is what changed for the first time in war. Russia has increasingly targeted logistics. Only Ukrainian railway was targeted 1,200 times, and each target is 17 drones, 100 drones, combined attack of drones and missiles. So we have seen those damages increase, and housing. So again, 3 sectors are energy, and all to do with energy, right? Utilities, water supply, logistics, and housing. And so this comes to our priorities for this year, because we have to go through those priorities. So the first priority would be a resilience plan, reconstructing energy, preparing for the next winter season, and reconstructing water supply, modernizing water supply, all of the utilities. We as a ministry are responsible for providing people with water and heat, and we cannot do that if their energy system doesn't work. So we coordinated very closely and very much with the Ministry of Energy, with the Ministry of Finance, with the whole government approach of the resilient plan for the most difficult regions for the next winter. And we are already preparing for next winter, because even if the war is over magically tomorrow, Kyiv will be incredibly difficult to get through the next winter, just because Kyiv does not have generation of electricity, right? And because the central energy stations and the central heating plants have been so much damaged and destroyed. So we are doing that, and that would be priority number 1. Second priority is transport and logistics. As I said, railway has been hugely damaged, but if you compare, for example, and go to the numbers again, Russia has damaged or destroyed 4,000 kilometers of roads in Ukraine, only in 2025. What does it mean? It is twice the amount of road needed to go from Luxembourg to Kyiv and back. So twice the amount of road from Luxembourg to Kiev. Or, for example, the amount of kilometers you need to go from Luxembourg to Iran. It's a lot, right? However, we have a number of financial mechanisms and we have a number of projects that are already in action, and roads are very possible for PPPs, for concession of the roads, for other private investment capital. Because what those numbers shows, there is no possibility we can do it only with public money, with European Commission guarantees, with EIB or EBRD. We need to go into the private investments, and that's what we are doing. And even now, we made a political decision to start a number of PPP and investment projects. For example, the biggest terminal in the port of Chernomorsk is right now up for a concession. We have a very transparent process that we do together with a number of huge banks and partners, and I think we need these successful cases even right now in difficult situation and difficult times to show that investments are possible, that investments are there, that there is a huge interest and there is a huge possibility for this PPP. And this is also the part of the plan. And then the portfolio of just our ministry with the European Investment Bank is $2.7 billion, which again is a lot. We do need more capacity for the regions and for us on how to use it. We do need more speed. I think Ivan talked about this word speed. This is a key word for this year. We need speedy procedures. We need better procedures. We need better quality of projects. We need better preparation of these projects. We here count heavily on the PPFs that we have created, Prepare and Ukraine First and others. And we encourage other countries to do their smaller PPFs for their businesses or for their interest in private bankable projects. We also talk about frontline regions, because all of what I described is very much concentrated on the 10 borderline of frontline regions. So the regions that are on the border of Russia, Belarus, and the Black Sea, they have more than 75% of all of the destructions. And they have the people. So which means, as Ivan has said, the Zaporizhia region has more than 1 million people, more than people here in Luxembourg, right? And people are not moving away. They don't want to be evacuated. They just want to have a possibility to have a hospital, to have an underground school or another school, to have heating, to have water, and to be able to stay there. And for us, it's strategically important that we reconstruct those borderline regions and that people stay there, that people open up their businesses, that people rent apartments, that people pay taxes, that the economy continues. And this is what I think we've showed in our resilience for those years of war, that it's still possible and that's still doable. So the main, as I said, priority would be energy, utilities, heating, and water, and that I would put as one word. Second would be transport or logistics, which we need to reconstruct. We need to have much more bankable projects in this area, but also much more focus from the banks and from the European Commission on possibilities in this sector. And also housing, we have not talked about that much, but we have a number of programs. And I'm quite proud to say that we have counted on a dashboard the amount of projects in reconstruction that only our ministry, together with the other agencies that we coordinate, did. And we have more than 2,700 projects of reconstruction done in 2025 and planned in 2026. And more than 1,300 multi-store buildings reconstructed in 2025, and it will be much more. Which means that if you count the school, water pipeline, kindergarten, hospital, a shelter, multi-store building, energy efficiency in multi-store buildings, we have more than 2,700 projects in 2025 and 2026. And I think this is quite impressive during the war, during the blackouts. So, I mean, we are ready to move forward faster. We are ready to move forward with better quality of projects. We do require help for us and for the regions, especially the borderline regions, to prepare those projects, to disburse the money, to get ready with the projects for the programs that we have with EIB and with other banks. We would like European Commission sometimes also to move faster. We do respect all the internal procedures and all the speed that you already have, but this is something that we still require and will need. And we are getting ready for the big reconstruction. Once the war is over, the big reconstruction will mean that we would have to get much faster with better projects, with better understanding, with better teams preparation. And here, as I said, we rely on PPFs. We also rely on something that we talked about on the project management unit or super project management unit that could be created, helping different EIB projects and different EBRD projects to move faster and to work more professionally in each sector, such as water, transport, housing, roads, etc. So I think this is some of the plan that we are discussing together and some of the priorities that are clearly visible. So yes, I am an optimist, and I think that Ukrainians have showed that even through those times, it's possible to not just plan or dream or be resilient, but it's possible to rebuild, it's possible to modernize, it's possible to go into investments, and this is how it is for us. We don't wait for 0 hour when the reconstruction can start. I think we've proven that all together, and we are super grateful for EIB, for the banks, for European Commission, for DG Enest, that they have not been waiting for 0 hour for the reconstruction to start, and we are doing it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Alna. Could you maybe comment a bit more on, you've outlined the reconstruction priorities. Could you maybe talk a bit, I know you don't speak for all of government, but where do you see the key reform priorities for this year?
That's a very good question. I mean, it did not change from the past year as well. We wish sometimes that the parliament would be more capable of those reforms right now, and the reforms did not change. We look at the rule of law, we look on the more transparency and anti-corruption, and we do what we can in each ministry. So for example, for us, I will still come back to reconstruction, even in the reforms process, it's super important to do those PPP projects in a very transparent way. And the concession of Chernomorsk, for example, we do together with EBRD and IFC and other international partners as a pilot projects, big pilot projects in reconstruction, rebuilding, investment. We do need to require it to be as transparent as possible, as open as possible, as European-oriented as possible. The Parliament has passed last summer the law on PPP, which was very, very heavily endorsed by the European Commission, which goes already into the best practices of the European Union. So the legal basis is there. For now, for us, the implementation part should be there as well. And I think that this perception of transparency, of anti-corruption, of the rule of law, it has a lot to do with the private capital money that are gonna be in Ukraine, right? Sometimes the perception is not the reality, right? So being member of parliament, I know how much money and how much informational attacks Russia did to actually damage the perception of transparency of those projects. And Russia still continues to do that. So we need to move faster, and we need to show incredible successful cases and results of reconstruction, of transparency, of the rule of law, of treatment of the foreign investments. And I think this is what we are doing.
Thank you so much. Let's now move on to Taras Pazashko, who is the Chief Financial Officer of Naftogaz. Naftogaz has gone through quite a leadership change last year. Could you maybe comment a bit on what do you see, what's the situation in Naftogaz, but broader in Ukraine's energy sector right now? Where do you see the most urgent needs? And how do you see the role of international partners in full reconstruction of Ukraine's energy sector?
Yes, thank you. So first of all, I would like to thank EIB for real practical support for Naftogaz in 2025 and 2026. Really, this 300 million euro and additional 50 millions of euro were valuable for us, and it helps us to go through the heating season. So some information about the Naftogaz. We are 100,000 employees. We have more than 60 entities and 8 business units. Our main focus is natural gas and also oil, crude oil. In addition, we have gas distribution networks, gas storage, and also several heating plants through the country. And attacks on our assets and our business were numerous, and there were hundreds of attacks through the last year and at the beginning of this year. And in 2025, there were two huge waves of attacks on Naftogaz. The first one was in February and March, and it influenced greatly. We lost more than 45% of our production capacity. And then we have recovered. By the end of September, we have recovered all our production facilities and reached the recordly high level of production. That is the record from, that is the best result from 2008. So we have successfully recovered, but at the beginning of October, there was a new wave, a new attack which has destroyed numerous production facilities and also infrastructure, which had influenced 60% of our capacity to produce natural gas. In this case, we had two campaigns to raise funding. First, it was after the first wave of attack, and we had raised more than €1 billion to procure natural gas to sustain our natural gas system throughout the heating season. And the next fundraising campaign was already after the second wave of attack. And we also raised more than €1 billion to cover the needs in natural gas procurement. So we had to import 5.7 billion cubic meters of natural gas through 2025. And we have secured 1.9 billion cubic meters of natural gas in first quarter of 2026. For now, we have more or less secured everything regarding the natural gas. We have just several facilities which are finalizing now, and it would be our reserve for any new attack and any new critical need which can arise. Really, we have attacks on our different facilities, not just natural gas, oil production. Our heating plant in Kherson is attacked almost every day. So the front line is less than 10 kilometers. So Russians have an opportunity to attack every day. That's why we're trying to sustain and to recover everything and to provide our services to the people. Throughout the heating season, in some cases, natural gas and the supply of Naftogaz was the only source of energy for the civilians. Well, you have your natural gas at the kitchen as the only source of the heat for your apartment. So finally, we have managed this heating season in the aspect of natural gas, and I'm sure that without this support of EIB, EBRD, Ukrainian banks, and of course donor supply and the Norwegian government, who provided a huge amount of support to Naftogaz, we could not manage it. Yet, what is ahead? All these damages and attacks influence greatly our capacity and capability to produce natural gas for the system. Our main goal in general for Naftogaz is to build up independence, energy independence in the aspect of natural gas. Now Ukraine is just covering from 80 to 85% of internal consumption. So we need to not just to have the recovery, but we have to develop. And that is our main task, not just to pay attention to the recovery, to the surviving mode, as Olga has said, but also to the development and to the transformation of our business and transformation of our company and energy system overall, because the decentralization practices are also the way to improve and to build up business efficiency and, of course, resilience. So finally, what are our needs for now? We are now working in two directions. First one is the recovery, and we are trying to recover all our damaged and destroyed facilities. We need a huge amount of funds, so it's budget. The total budget is more than 900 million euro, and we have agreed on more than 200 million for donor support on the equipment needed. We are covering more than 450 million by our own funds for the construction, for the installation costs, and so on and so on, and of course the security. But our need is 250 million euro for the new equipment. And the very specific thing here is that it's not only for the replacement. That is sometimes, and in most of the cases, more efficient equipment that will improve our capacity, that will improve the level of carbon emission, that will be more efficient, and that is especially build back better. So we would focus on it, and we hope we will find the solution, quick solution for our critical needs. Because the critical needs here, that is the equipment supply. Equipment supply has more than sometimes a year of delivery time. So if we prepay today, we would not receive this equipment by the beginning of the next heating season. That's why that is a critical need. We have to make the prepayment and to be ready to pay all the amount immediately. That's why we're working on it and trying to find the best solution to cover these needs.
Thank you so much. We have roughly half an hour for discussions or questions from the audience. So if any of you have a question, please raise your hand, try to catch my attention and introduce yourself. I see the first hand in the second row, please.
Thank you very much for inspiring so much food for thought. And like Alona, I choose to be an optimist as well. So I'm Kristina Mikulova, the head of office in Kyiv. Nice to see you all together on this panel. So as an optimist, what would you answer to a donor, international finance institution, to an investor, if you were asked, what's Ukraine's economy of the future? What should we invest in? What is the comparative advantage? What are the strengths? What are we bringing to the table? As one of you said, apologies, I can't quote that exact person back to them. We like to say that Ukraine needs the European Union. Likewise, Europe needs Ukraine. So what is that value added?
Thank you. Anyone wants to take the question right now?
I want to answer, of course. Dear Christina, I have an answer for you. Let's speak about invest potential of the Zaporizhzhia region. Before 24th of February 2022, every fourth kilowatt of energy in Ukraine was producing in the Zaporizhzhia region. It means that we have high quality and high priority energy for steel production in our region. Also, we have many unique factories like titanium factory in Zaporizhia region. It means that, on my opinion, if we look forward to my region, of course, we need investors and we need to producing titanium for Boeing Airbuses in Zaporizhia. And it's like a priority for us. We understand that now Zaporizhia nuclear power station occupied by Russian troops. I know that we will liberate it, and I understand that we will have big quantities of cheap energy. And it means that producing factory of those factories who will need very big numbers of energy, we can build around Zaporizhia nuclear power station. And why very important for me personally, European and international investments, because with money we can take security, and it is very important for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I would just add and to tell you what we're hearing from multinationals and Ukrainian companies. There are two other sectors that I think will be pretty obvious. The first one is agriculture, and the impact that Ukraine will have as part of the EU in terms of high-quality agricultural land, but also the opportunity to build an agricultural supply chain and downstream operations in Ukraine. And then the second one very much is around technology and the innovation economy, the redeploying of intellectual capital that's been developed in the defense tech sector into dual use and other commercial applications is a big area of focus that we hear about from international investors.
Thank you, Taras. And then we'll move to other questions. Thank you.
One short message. Naftogaz and Ukraine has huge resources of natural gas and oil. The resources are higher than 2 trillion cubic meters of natural gas. So we can supply, if we produce this gas, we can supply not just to Ukraine, but also to Europe. And investments are needed first to cover our internal consumption and then to be able to supply to the surrounding countries. So really huge potential, at least in this area.
Thank you. I profoundly apologize. I missed your hand. Aliona.
Thanks so much, Christina. You do not pose easy questions, but I will try to be brief. As I said, I think we need to openly say and accept that the world is entering a new era of turbulence, of things being done differently, and we need to prepare for those things. And there are not a lot of countries in the world that have an expertise in that have capacity to do it, that have resilience, people, technologies, and strengths to do it under pressure and to do it in a very changing and turbulent world, under shellings, under drones. What Ivan has not told you that he's building right now, more than 10 underground schools. How many, Ivan? More than 20 underground schools for children, and they are absolutely exceptional and incredible. I don't want this to be the economy of the world of the future, but the fact that we are able to do that, I think, shows a lot. And we talk about people, we talk about technologies, and we talk about the expertise that we have right now. When we talk about people, it's about the resilience, the capacity, the fast moving. When we talk about technologies, we are obviously talking about drones and physical protection that we are doing together with Agency for Reconstruction, nets that we are doing on all of the major roads of Ukraine, just thousands and thousands and thousands of kilometers and tons of nets that stop the drones. And if you have seen a picture of that, it's quite impressive. The world did not believe us when we tried those technologies, and now other countries come and learn from our experience. We have modular shelters that the agency and the ministry are building right now in Borodyanka and in other cities, which is 10 times cheaper than the regular bomb shelter, can be assembled in 2 weeks, and looks like something from the future, but the future is there now. And we have new infrastructure, big infrastructure projects. that still go into this infrastructure diplomacy of Ukraine possibly being, the country that connects Asia and Europe and other corridors, big corridors, not just the TNT, but other big corridors and gateway of the world. So I think this expertise cannot be undervalued. And I think that we've shown that we can do it under pressure, we can do it with innovation, we can do it with the people. And this expertise, unfortunately, will be very much needed and is very much needed. And we are ready to share that. We have already such countries as Finland, Denmark, Norway, the Baltic states who are coming and learning this experience. But the world is changing. And we are quite ready to share the experience of how to work under pressure, under shellings, under bombs in the changing world, with not enough money and not enough resources, but for sure enough resilience and enough positivity in that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for highlighting that this is really not a one-way street. This is an exchange that's beneficial for all. I mean, you are paying a huge price for learning how to do that under certain conditions. Olga, do you want to add to this question?
Yes, I think it's important to say that it should be the establishment of market-led recovery first, and then to foster the private sector to actually scale up and innovate so that to allow for high-quality employment. Because here we should keep in focus our people, and we have a highly talented people who actually will be the task force for every reconstruction efforts, post-war development. And here, with all the labor shortages that we are witnessing, we are having a very critical need for this economic dynamism to get people back home and for them to be comfortable in terms of having all the zone for high quality employment.
Thank you so much. We have roughly 20 minutes, and I've seen a couple of hands from the audience, so we'll take all the questions now, and then we'll come back to the panel who can answer your questions. You can pick and choose, and also add your closing remarks.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for a brilliant conversation. Francesca Grandi, I direct the global program at Transparency International on defense and security. Ms. Shkrum, thank you very much for mentioning anti-corruption and integrity. I think is an essential part of such an important conversation. I would just like to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on that in terms of what is the plan. It's very clear that there is political intent. It's very clear that there is public and social support for integrity and anti-corruption measures, and that's very positive and very encouraging. And I cannot stress enough how impressive the resilience and the efforts that have been made so far have been. Since I am in the business of supporting this kind of efforts, I would like to know more about what people like us can do to support. And so more specifically, as investment is coming in, as money will start inevitably to flow in more significantly, especially in the defense sector, a sector in which I believe you have a lot of expertise and a lot of experience to share and export. I would like to know more about how we can support and how we can work together to make the safeguards and to make the governance framework stronger and more resilient for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We now move on to other questions.
Okay, thank you. Can I start? My name is Lelena Marcinkevich. I represent the civil society network Bankwatch. So my question was, I wanted to raise the question about the sustainability, but I think it was already covered, so I'll go to the next one. I think the red line of the discussion was the timeliness of everything, that it is crucial. So I would like to ask, so what are actually the bottlenecks from the donor side? Maybe the Minister of the Finance can mention, or other donors. So what is actually the bottlenecks so that the initiatives are not timely? From our experience, for example, I can bring the Just Transition Fund, which was announced last summer, and it is still not operational. So what are the issues here? Why is it still not included in the public investments? And another matter, I'm the civil society representative here, and I would like to bring the issue that everything that donors are doing is crucial to be transparent, and we are open to be involved in any processes about it. For now, it was already mentioned that the Ukraine plan as a part of the Ukraine facility has to be changed or amended, and we still do not see the processes or consultations open. So if you have any information about that, please.
Thank you. Could you please pass the microphone to the gentleman in front of you in the first row? Thank you.
Two quick questions. One concerns private sector involvement. There's a general agreement that public money will not be enough, that we need private investment. And at the same time, everyone agrees that waiting for day zero doesn't quite cut it. We need to act now. But I represent Polish Development Bank. Together with EBRD, we're probably involved in at least one industrial project, which is private sector, that has already been bombed after being constructed. So what's the, first of all, do you see many of such private sector involvements from abroad? And if not, what's still needed to unlock it? Because even PPP projects, be it a port or a road, is tricky because there's a number of risks to challenge. And the second question concerns resilience. Ukraine is fantastic in reacting under pressure and improvising to make life bearable and actually work reasonably well in super difficult circumstances. But what is something that you really, really miss and wish to have had before the war as a lesson to all the others? I mean, what's really something that we should start building, reconstructing, rerouting, and doing before the crisis hits?
Thank you so much. And we have one more question here in the second row.
My name is Tom Plummer. I'm one of the founders of a deep tech drone company, and I'm happy to hear that you mentioned drones earlier. I want to emphasize and will ask a question and offer a suggestion, because I now work for 10 years in the space. I will try to get it done in 2 minutes. Okay, that's a little sporty, but I will try to offer this suggestion because I think it can help. So I worked for 10 years in the drone space now, focused on medical logistics with drones, built a cargo drone company, 150 people funded. Thank you for EIB with 40 million by EIB, total 120 million. And we built this with the full idea to do good with drones in the world, civil. Then we were asked, can we team up with Ukrainian partners, which is Tough Industries, the current largest drone manufacturer. They build 80,000 drones a month. Super impressive, very strong team. I really like to see, I mean, my partners are so amazing. It's so motivating to see this survival mode, but also really going all the way, building this company from scratch over the last 3 years. Knowing that I talk to bankers now, or people in the space with expertise, they made in 3 years from zero, without investment, without any venture debt or anything, now to 1 billion revenue. So these guys know what they do, but still they get bombed. Their facilities get attacked the minute. I was in Kiev just on the anniversary not long ago, and I couldn't even take pictures of the facility because I visit the factory, but even if you picture just the color of the windows, a missile might hit very soon after. So, but I learned how they produce things, low cost, masses. We don't do this. In Germany, we built a factory that produces high-end products, fully certified for civil airspace, everything. It took 10 years to basically just build the drone, and now we start selling it, while they, in 3 years, built now 80,000 drones capacity a month. What I want to say here is, and this is for the people with the banking background, there's a massive business while we can really truly collaborate and help Ukraine and Europe at the same time build true resilience, because there's Build with Ukraine, a new program. I was on the stage at Munich Security Conference, signing with President Zelensky behind me. Luckily, he supported, together with our Minister of Defense, Pistorius. We signed an agreement with Tough Industries that we now manufacture the drones in a safe place in Germany. Reactivating automotive, we will just put 150 people back to work in the next 2-3 months to mass produce the same drones they have now battle proven. They actually work. It's not any PR, it's not drones like super expensive and not actually helping the soldiers. It's true drones. We start with reconnaissance drones. We will mass produce interceptor drones. We're talking about 20, 30, 40, maybe 50,000 just for the beginning, and that's just the beginning. And this capacity will help Europe, because if things get bad, and it might get bad, because a forced peace might mean that there's 2 million well-equipped, super well-trained soldiers, an aggressor that needs war for economy. And that means it can, while I wish for Ukraine that this stops, I saw it in Kiev, what it means with all the little flags, showing that all the dead soldiers, people that die for fighting for freedom. So I want this to stop, but it must stop in a way that it will not continue in the Baltics and so on. So we need this strength, because unfortunately the aggressor understands only strength. Now I know it's 2 minutes, but I tried to summarize. Build with Ukraine is an initiative that has been set up, that Ukrainian companies team up and create joint ventures, like with drone companies like us. We now will mass produce tough drones in Germany, which will give new jobs to the people that just lost the jobs due to the declining automotive industry. So we create new jobs. We create a new industrial base for Europe, means that we have this power to mass produce interceptor and all kinds of drones.
Would you like to ask a question?
The question is, I love the fact rebuild Ukraine, and I have been here all the forums. I love EIB Forum. I have been for the last years here, and there was already this topic 2 years ago, rebuild Ukraine. But the first and major step before this is how to win this war. That's the question. And the answer is total air superiority is one of the major pieces. I spoke to General Puschnik, I spoke to different German generals, Mr. Freuding, and so on. Really great generals. And they said simply, you need for months a wall. And I'm not talking about the drone wall to sell some more drones. I'm talking about serious intercepting all drones that come, stopping any vehicle that comes. And our drones can scan entire surface. And this is not a sales pitch, okay? Please don't get me wrong. Yes, we need funding to build this. I'm still raising funds all the time. I'm still a startup founder, trying to pitch here also that drones are a big business, because my partners just made $1 billion now every year annual revenue by setting up a company from scratch with zero funding.
Thank you.
So the question is how to win the war. The answer is, and I want to discuss this with all of you afterwards. Can we team up? Can we team up and build this capacity? Because it will be in the next chapter, resilience for Europe. But in the first case, it should win the war in Ukraine, because air superiority is one big piece of the puzzle to win this war. And it's possible. It's possible to win this war and show the aggressor that it's not okay what they are doing, because it's really horrible.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Maybe we'll go from this side now. Maybe you all take your questions and pick, but I think that the last one about how to win the war is also partly for the audience and the speakers we have here about how can we help scale up Ukraine's defenses, Ukraine's ability to be resilient and stay resilient. So you can pick and choose. I will just summarize. There is a question about corruption and how can we involve the civil society in monitoring some of the spending, which by design, part of that is non-public. Could you talk about the bottlenecks on the donor side, where you see that donors can do things differently? Though I would say, as a former government official, I've seen a lot of bureaucratic creativity in its best possible form that has helped Ukraine throughout the 4 years. How to attract more private sector investment? We've seen the problems that the companies are facing, even those who are investing in Ukraine. What to do now? What are the priorities? And last but not least, and maybe that's a question to Ivan Fedorov, but others please comment as well. What are the lessons learned? What would your advice be for the Europeans to do better now? So if crisis hits, they're better prepared. Besides taking lessons from Ukraine, of course. Taras, the floor is yours.
I'd like to address to the question regarding the donor support and the overall support to Ukraine and especially to Naftogaz. The first thing is, of course, to facilitate all the processes. Really, we had managed with numerous challenges which were ahead, and for example, the case regarding our fundraising for natural gas and sustainability during this heating season. But the key question and the key issue is that we should, together with the donors, together with financial institutions, find out the instruments and the way to facilitate all the processes, because timing here is extremely topical.
Thank you so much. Herdian, maybe could you comment on the reforms? And also, I mean, EU has been one of the key supporters of anti-corruption reforms and civil society in Ukraine.
Absolutely. No, absolutely crucial for all the reasons we have already discussed. Very concretely, there will be a revision of the Ukraine plan to channel some of this additional money from the 90 billion to Ukraine, and it will focus very heavily on anti-corruption fundamental reforms. And obviously there will be consultation on it. I hope to be able to start this very, very soon indeed. And then secondly, in the summer, we will be reporting already on the implementation of the commitments that Ukraine has taken as part of the EU accession process. As I said, we've been very fast. All of it is there, but now it needs to be implemented. And it is understandable that after 4 years of war, it's challenging. The Rada is finding it difficult to advance. But this summer, our member states are going to be looking at delivery, not just plans, not just intentions, but delivery. And so is the private sector. So I'm calling on everyone here to take that extremely seriously. It's all about credibility of the delivery of the reforms. Early summer will be an important moment to collectively look at how far Ukraine has got. Thank you.
Thanks. Time is indeed of essence in so many ways. Aliona Schrom?
I cannot comment for the whole government, but I can comment on what could be done and where we need help in transparency mechanisms and from the civil society in our area of expertise, which is development of regions, communities, infrastructure, recovery, housing, reconstruction, etc., etc. Basically, when we were mandated by the president and by the prime minister to do the physical protection of energy facilities, it was middle of October last year. We were faced with a dilemma that there were a number of questions about the previous protection mechanisms, about the previous numbers, about the cost of protection, etc., not done by us, but in general done by Ukrainian entities. And all of those objects, all of those protection mechanisms are top secret. So you cannot do a dashboard where you will show what kind of protection with what kind of concrete you did in what kind of energy facility and what kind of transformator have you covered. Otherwise, it makes no sense. Otherwise, Putin, he does satellite images every day of those objects, but he would just have a perfect dashboard to damage everything that we have reconstructed. But there needed to be a way to show the civil society, the population of Ukrainian, average Ukrainians, people in the army, that we are transparent, that we're doing all that we can. So we had a number of sessions, and we really need here maybe more expertise and more help from Transparency International, from civil society, of what can we do more. But right now, every week, Agency for Reconstruction does a dashboard of monitoring of prices of all the physical protections that they do. Every week you can go to the agency website and you can see an average price without physical location, but an average price in every region of concrete, of metal construction, of nets, of armature or something like that. And you can see whether it was above the market average or below the market average, and what regions did what. Because each region has a very difficult set of prices. If it is in Zaporizhia, it's much more probably difficult to do the protection than in somewhere in the western part of Ukraine. So you can monitor the prices without identifying physical locations and physical secret materials, etc., but you still can have a picture and you can have an information to understand. And the same could be done in other areas. So here we would like innovative ideas from the civil society, and we would like some kind of help from donors on how can we make it more transparent, but not more risky in terms of security and defense for our people and the people who are doing the reconstruction. If we reconstruct a bridge in the city of Kiev or in the area of Kiev region, it will be very difficult for me to show all that we did publicly and even to show a picture of the bridge when we finish the reconstruction. Because I know that that would be targeted by Russia. Sometimes it's not because what I showed on my Facebook, but because they want to make a perception that it's Ukrainian officials to blame for the damages or for the shellings, right? Sometimes they see it without us by satellite. But it's become very difficult to be transparent in a way what materials we are using, where we are doing the reconstruction, how we are doing it, but we try to do our best in this way. And it's even more difficult for the Ministry of Defense, I can imagine, but they are doing this way as well. So any kind of assessment and help here would be great. And just one more word about the reforms that we have not talked here about. It's more to do with the Ministry of Finance, but it's also a lot of homework for us. It's public investment management reform, right? So when the needs are overwhelming, you have to prioritize. And each year we try to prioritize. We do the single project pipeline of the priority projects that has to be done and has to be financed and why those are priority projects. And we are forcing right now, the regions, the governors, the communities to do their own single project pipelines. And this exercise has been very useful because Ukrainians are great in resilience, but not so great in strategy planning under the bombs and shellings and without, water and heat. But we are forcing them to do that, and we are forcing ourselves to do that because for the big reconstruction, we would need to prioritize even more. But now we need more mechanisms, more guarantees, more insurance and more money coming into those SPP projects. Otherwise, mayors have done the SPPs, the single project pipeline, but they get no money for those projects, and obviously they don't understand why did they do that. But this reform is also one of the core ones in the government.
Thanks. I take it as an invitation for the civil society to further help with transparency. With the risk of being very unfair to the three speakers that we still have, I will just ask you to be very brief with respect to the other panels, but we don't want to leave without hearing you.
Well, let me just quickly, on the private sector, that's what I'll cover. I would say first, it's very, very inspirational how ambitious Ukrainian companies, private companies are in investing. And the speaker referred to, I think, I don't know if it's the same one, but I visited a facility that had been destroyed partially by a Russian missile. The company was already rebuilding it and developing their next set of investment plans. So I think Ukrainian companies have adjusted, have adapted, and are investing. We're starting to see now conditions, the minister referenced the port PPP that we're working on, where I think we'll start to see international investment in logistics first, and then eventually we'll see, but only when the security conditions are appropriate, multinationals make real long-term capital investments. But I will say the Ukrainian companies, private companies, are investing a significant amount today with support, but they're investing a significant amount.
Olga?
Given the scrutiny on time, a few words from me with regards to, in general, on the question whether there are obstacles and what are they and how we see the movement towards more flexibility. I would say that I have the basis for comparison. I've been for a while in the ministry, and since the start of the war, there has been a huge shift from classic bureaucracy towards more flexible and creative systems incorporating, starting from the establishment of the new tools, which allowed very efficient channeling of and anchoring of the partner countries' funding, but also towards more blended finance, EU guarantees as the new narrative for us. I would explain why, because from the standpoint of the fiscal sustainability and macroeconomic stability, we no longer operate under the necessity of providing sovereign guarantees. So it is a huge shift towards the IFIs taking more risks on their shoulders and recalibrating within their own classic mandates towards more flexibility. Of course, on the very ground, with regards to the procurement rules, with regards to the tenders, with regards to the EU standards that are to be aligned with our legislation and vice versa, of course, a huge work is still to be done. But at the same time, we do understand how much effort has already been put by each of the DFI and IFI towards having more alignment with the reality that we face. And when we speak about the speed, we are not, putting it as a judgment. We simply reflect what is on top of our priority from the standpoint and how we would like to see the whole system rolling up and the way it should roll up together with the EU colleagues in terms of the integration itself.
Thank you so much. And last but not least, Ivan.
Yes, thank you. I understand how much time costs. That's why I very closely. First of all, you answer how to activate private business. On my opinion, give insurance. In Ukraine, we need military insurance, and it is one of the most important things. Second, what lessons learned you need? I'm sorry for my example, I'm sorry. But on my opinion, from my experience, I think 100 FPV drones, which cost 200,000 of euros, very easy, can make blackout in Luxembourg for several hours. That means that yesterday when I went from airport, I looked to your transformator stations and I'm sorry.
Thank you. I have failed as a moderator to enforce
And
time,
last.
but I think the speakers have provided a lot of food for thought on how to continue supporting Ukraine and learn from Ukraine that we don't have to be sorry if something happens. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for that wonderful panel. To move it on and to kind of save a little bit of time, if you are exiting, please do so very fast. But I would actually encourage you to stay, of course, because next we have a panel on global gateway partnerships. And this is our final panel. So I really would love you to stay. And this is all about how the EU can strengthen global partnerships through the Global Gateway Initiative. So before I introduce this panel, I'm going to ask everybody to be quiet. So if there's conversation to be had following that panel, either exit the room very quickly or preferably stay in the room and then talk in about an hour's time. So for everybody standing close to the door, move one side of the door of the other. Thank you. I won't call on a speaker until the floor is silent. So, global gateway partnerships, and it is going to be a very, very interesting final panel. And I do encourage anybody who is close to the door to move the other way and come back into their seats, because to set the scene, I want to introduce Marek Mora, who's Vice President of the European Investment Bank. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, dear panelists, distinguished guests, it's a pleasure for me to introduce the panel on global gateway partnerships, the final panel of this, we can already say that, very successful and stimulating forum. Let me warmly welcome our panelists. I would like to sincerely thank you for your availability and readiness to share your perspectives on how we can work better to deliver on common development goals. We have a very diverse panel today, and I'm very grateful for it. Each and every one of you will probably have your own take on how to create long-term partnerships supporting development ambitions. The task is, of course, not easy. The geopolitical landscape is undergoing a profound transformation. We don't have to speak the two wars, one directly in our neighborhood, the other one in Middle East. Power balances are shifting, supply chains are being reconfigured. But we are of a firm view that cooperation must replace dependency and rivalry, must give way to partnerships. The central theme of our panel is Global Gateway. This is one of Europe's answers to global upheavals. It is its positive offer to the world, a value-based strategy grounded in transparency, sustainability, and mutual benefit. As a financing arm of the European Union, the EIB plays a central role in turning this 300 billion euro EU strategy into reality. We have already invested more than 25 billion euro in Global Gateway priority sectors: sustainable energy, transport, social infrastructure, digital, health and education, and mobilized over 125 billion euro across the globe from public and private investors on the back of the EU contribution. Our contribution, the EIB contribution, is threefold. First, we provide scale. The global investment gap, particularly in climate, connectivity, and social infrastructure, is measured in trillions, not billions. I do not speak about Czech koruna, I don't speak about Italian lira, I mean US dollar and euro, trillions euro. Through our lending capacity, blending instruments, and ability to mobilize private capital, the EIB brings financial firepower that makes transformational projects possible. Second, we provide standards. In a world where financing can sometimes come with hidden costs, Europe offers transparency, environmental responsibility, and respect for local communities. Our projects are aligned with the Paris Agreement, uphold high social and governance standards, and are designed to be financially sustainable over the long term. Third, we foster partnerships. Global Gateway aims to create solutions to development challenges with partner countries, but based on their priorities and development strategies. Whether in the EU's neighborhood, in Africa, in Latin America, or Asia, our objective is clear: to support local value creation, skills development, economic resilience, and the establishment of sustainable value chains mutually beneficial for the EU and its partners. Global Gateway embodies this win-win philosophy. For our partner countries, it means modernized infrastructure, better access to clean energy, digital connectivity, and improved public services. It means jobs, innovation, and stronger integration into the global economy. For Europe, it means deeper economic ties, more resilient supply chains, and new markets and opportunities for European companies. Firms that bring world-class expertise in renewable energy, transport system, water management, digital technologies, and healthcare infrastructure. You heard yesterday from our president in detail about the EIB Group's extensive activities and ambitions outside the EU. Our message, her message, was clear. While some are pulling back, Europe is stepping up. I'm looking forward to hearing your views. Once again, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much. And now to welcome onto the panel, please, your moderator, Ihsan Bilal, who is the Director of the European Centre for Development Policy Management, the ECDPM. And joining him on stage, we have Jessica Roswell, European Commissioner for Environment, Water Resilience, and a Competitive Circular Economy, Jorge Moreira de Silva, UN Under-Secretary General and UNOPS Executive Director, Mathieu Muzumdar, Deputy CEO of Meridiam, Hubert Danso, CEO and Chairman of Africa Investor Group, and Prishani, we must say also that Angela Sokjanovic couldn't come, Minister of Education from Montenegro, but we were delighted to have Prishani Satyapal, who's the Executive Director of ECHO, Earth, Our Common Home, and Chief Inspiration Officer of Sustainability Truthing.
Good morning. It is really a privilege to be with such a prestigious panel for this final discussion, which is on the Global Gateway. And At ECDPM, we work on external European relations and the dynamics in developing countries. And one of the questions that I guess the most often is, what is Global Gateway? And I have these questions from partners of the EU, but also by many European actors. What is Global Gateway, and how does it work in practice? What does it mean concretely? And I think we should be aware, I'm not going to be able to answer this question fully now, because I think otherwise we wouldn't have no panel discussion at all. But I just wanted to stress the evolution that we can perhaps see about Global Gateway. Initially, Global Gateway has been a way to brand and package and convey externally activities that, in fact, Europe has been doing already for quite some time on stimulating investment and based on development finance. And of course, being here at the EIB, this has been work that the EIB has been doing also with other European actors at a large scale for quite some time. So there was indeed an element of rebranding and repackaging. But there was also perhaps two additional dimensions. The first one has been to say that we are not going to talk just about how much we put in the machine, so how much aid is going to be provided for Global Gateway, but the notion was how much we can mobilize in terms of investment. So it was more in terms of the outputs, and I think that was quite interesting. So in fact, we come with these 300 billion euros that were supposed to be mobilized by 2027, already reached now, and a third of it coming from the European Investment Bank, thanks to the efforts. But in fact, instead of communicating for how much each actor has contributed to, it's really the question of the mobilization, which was quite, I think, an interesting dimension. The second one is that EU institutions and was more used to communicate in terms of what is the EU, as EU institutions, EIB and the European Commission under the EU budget are doing. And then came this Team Europe approach. So this notion that it is not just under what we do under the EU budget and with the EU institutions alone, but how the institutions also from each EU member states are contributing, and it's a collective effort that came together. That is, I would say, the initial dimension of Global Gateway. What we have seen in particular stressed by the von der Leyen Commission 2.0, the second one, which was stressing, we want to have an investment commission, but I think it is further stressed also by the turmoil that we're seeing in the world these days. It has been this notion of we need to think much more at the European level, what is also our own strategic interest, and how can we focus better on what really matters for us, competitiveness. And I was happy to hear also during this forum a lot of discussions of, even when it was not about the EIB global part of the forum, but the connection between what's happening at the domestic level within the EU and the international dimension. The EU cannot operate in a vacuum, and so this connection is really, and Global Gateway is one of the instruments to make this connection between what we do internally and what is done externally. A second dimension, of course, has been this notion of strategic autonomy. And again, strategic autonomy means we cannot work just in autarky, so it also means strategic diversification. And how can we have different partners and how can work? And finally, what Nadia Calvino, I think, mentioned very nicely in her introductions as well, is this notion of win-win partnerships that I think you were stressing so many times. So this notion that we do have a partnerships and it's a win for the partners. So it is these initial notions that we were talking about, how to mobilize investment for the partners in the notion of development finance, but also this notion that there is something for us. So the question is, how do we articulate that in practice, and what are some of these changes meaning concretely? And I think that's where I will turn to the panel, and I will start with you, Madam Commissioner, on perhaps this notion of partnership, and how do you see this notion of partnership in what you're doing? And I think at the European level, we started with this water resilience strategy that has been initiated, and perhaps what is the international dimension of what you're doing, and how do you link that up to the partnership?
No, thank you very much, and thank you for having me on this panel, and thank you for talking about Global Gateway. As you say, I also get this question, and as you say, it's a win-win for Europe, and I think it's also linked to how we build a strong Europe. Yes, I have the wrong title, and one of the things that is in my title that finally you may say that Europe, actually EU is putting as a priority is water. And of course water is something that is not only a challenge for Europe, it's something that is really that we need partners. We cannot do that by ourselves. Water is by definition circular, or like we have one water cycle that is broken and we need to focus on that. So we put forward a water resilience strategy last year, which of course focus also on the challenges that we have in Europe, both when it comes to quantity here. Sometimes we have too much, sometimes too little, sometimes at the same time, and that is a challenge, but not only for Europe, of course, but also the quality. So that is one thing that we are doing, but we are working very much with global partners on water. For example, we have a dialogue, structured dialogues with China, with Egypt, and also I've been, wherever I go in the world, I always have discussions on water, whether it's on the UN conference, on the UNGA, whether it's in Malaysia, whether it's in Africa, in different places I've been. I also would say that also in Europe, and that's maybe back to a strong Europe, because I was in Davos last year in the World Economic Forum, I was in the Munich Security Conference this year and last year, and I would say that water is something that connects us all, because that is something that is a threat to us when it comes to security. It's something that is driving migration, driving conflicts and so forth. So for us, it's obvious that we need to focus on water. And here, the Global Gateway is important. As you mentioned, the figures, almost more than 300 billion euros. Together with the EIB, working very close. We have a lot of flagships all around the world. I'm working, of course, with my colleague Josef Sikela mostly on this. He's out there. But when it comes to water, it's very specific in the Global Gateway. And I think that is obvious for the reasons I said. Also, one thing I want to add here, because we talk a lot about energy, of course, in these days. And here, again, the nexus between water and energy production is something that we build together with partners around the world and building that in a sustainable way. So I have a lot of examples here when it comes to this example, but also sanitation, of course, in Africa, irrigation. I also will say that Europe is learning a lot from our partners when it comes to transboundary cooperation. So it's a lot of things that we are doing on, but water is one thing that I think join us.
Thank you very much. We'll get back to the nexus and to some of the examples. Perhaps let's stick to how do you see a global gateway, and in particular, since we were talking about partnership, it's difficult to not think about the UN, at least in Europe, where we're very concerned about the multilateralism and the UN institutions. So, Jorge Moreira da Silva, we're very happy to have you here. You're also not only the UN Under-Secretary General, but you're also the Executive Director of UNOPS. That plays a very important role. Can you perhaps just, for those that would not be familiar, UNOPS is a very important institution, but perhaps not the most known. Tell us what is exactly UNOPS and what is your contributions in the partnerships to Global Gateway?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank Nadia Calvino for the kind invitation. And indeed, UNOPS is on the ground. So it's an agency that is focused on implementation. We are non-programmatic, which means that we are demand-driven. We are based on the demand from partner countries, and we work on infrastructure, procurement, and project management with a high concentration in highly fragile conflict and violent contexts. And that's why the Global Gateway makes all sense for us. In addition to what Vice President of the EIB said about the added value of the Global Gateway, about being based on standards, based on collaboration, there is another element that for us it's crucial, which is getting the things done on infrastructure. There is a nexus between infrastructure and the SDGs. According to some research that we have conducted with Oxford University, 92% of the Sustainable Development Goals depend on infrastructure. And 80% of the greenhouse gas emissions are related with infrastructure. So unless we get it right on infrastructure, sustainable and resilient infrastructure, we will miss the SDGs and we'll miss the Paris Agreement. That's why it's so important.
So Europe was right to focus on the global gateway on infrastructure, which is sometimes a question we get.
No, I think it's where we need a game changer. We need the game changer to be not on mobilization of finance. As you said, it's about mobilizing, aligning, because mobilization alone won't fix the problem. We need to mobilize and align all finance with SDGs and with climate objectives, and we need to focus on delivery, because I know many contexts where policy reforms have been put in place, where finance has been provided, but at the end of the day, we have issues on implementation. That's why the focus on implementation, overcoming the bottlenecks on implementation is so important, and that's why I think that we have been one of the partners of choice of Global Gateway, partnering with the European Union on infrastructure, particularly in the really difficult context.
Thank you very much. Let me turn to Prishani Satyapal, who is, I love your title, you're the Chief Inspiration Officer of Sustainability Truthing. Perhaps a word on your inspiration officer would be good, but when we're talking about partnerships, ultimately what matters is what it means for the local populations. Can you tell us how do you see this connection between these broad agendas and what is happening at the local level?
Thank you very much, and thank you so much to the EIB team for this extraordinary opportunity. I want to introduce, in line with the word inspiration, a word that perhaps hasn't been used very much over the last few days, which is the word peace. And when we talk about Global Gateway, when we talk about reaching communities and we talk about enabling the strength of Europe, part of what I do is spend time in communities that we don't often reach. So as much as the infrastructure investments are required in Johannesburg, Accra, Lagos, Cairo, I spend time in communities that we don't even hear about every day, where perhaps the fragility of the world is enabled easier. So part of what we do is I work with perhaps one of the first development agencies, which is the Catholic Church. I'm Hindu, from South Africa, working in Nigeria and Rome, so I feel like sometimes I am my own multilateral agency. But what do I do with the Catholic Church is through universities, hospitals, schools, we enable that first development agency to reach communities and partner with groups, investors, to enable infrastructure while communities, and this is fundamental, communities are able to hear from the local priest or imam or sister a conversation around trust in terms of that infrastructure enablement. So locating the infrastructure within a church property and from that expanding out into communities, that's a different approach that we're advocating. And also, just in Nigeria alone, like you heard from Cardinal Turkson yesterday, we have 18,000 sites that reach 89 million people. So what we're saying is we want scale, but accelerated scale in places that people already trust.
Good, we'll get back again. I'll have plenty of questions to you about concrete examples, but for this first round, I think it's good that we have a general overview. Let me turn to Mathieu Muzonda from Meridiam. When we're talking about infrastructure, then you feel at ease there, no? That's one of the core business of what you're trying to do. Can you tell us how Global Gateway is helping perhaps, or the approach that you're having internationally in trying to develop infrastructure?
Absolutely. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. What we do at Meridiam is really we're a mission company and a B Corp, and really our mission is to deliver sustainable infrastructure that can have a positive impact on local communities. In practice, one of the key challenges we have is implementation, is really unlocking the projects. So it's about mobilizing the right financing, but it's also about bringing the right know-how, the right supply chain, the right technical expertise to actually build these assets, make them investable, build them, and then in a way de-risk them from construction, manage them over the long term to ensure that we can actually deliver the kind of impact that these projects are designed to deliver. And so this is where To do this for projects which, especially very large projects, but not only, but if you're talking about projects of a very large scale, to Vice President Morris' point, to do this and do it in a sustainable way, this is also about making these projects affordable. This is also about ensuring that your project is not just built, but it can be affordable, it can be have the positive economic impact over the long term. And this is where, to do this, you need to align a number of stakeholders, locally, but also internationally. And at the European level, we have a number of tools, agencies, international finance institutions, and know-how that we can put together. And it's this kind of coalition that can really help unlock projects. And in this way, this is where Global Gateway resonates well with our day-to-day job, which is really to align stakeholders to unlock sustainable infrastructure projects.
And could you just tell us, how do you in practice try to align them? I mean, it sounds nice in principle, but I mean, you are a key actor. So what do you do concretely to try to align these engagements of different actors?
Thank you. It's art more than science, I guess. And I can perhaps take an example of a project that we're developing currently in Jordan, which is a water project actually, which is a very critical infrastructure project. It's really the lifeline of the country. If you think of Jordan being one of the most water-scarce countries in the world, you need to deliver more water. And so this project is meant to deliver at 40% of the water of the country. So very, very impactful project in turn. To do this, you need a number of building blocks. So you need to build a big desalination power plant. You need to build 400 or 500 kilometers of pipe to bring this water to Amman. And to Commissioner Roswell's point, you also need a lot of energy. So we actually have a 300 megawatt solar plant to actually fuel the whole thing in a sustainable way. This is a very critical project in itself, as you can imagine, but it's making it sustainable and making it efficient is also about the how. And so to your point, coming to your question, how you align stakeholders, first of all, you need to build affordability. That's a key element because, and so this is, I can give you some examples of how we've done that, but a lot of it is around mobilizing blended finance, and we have a lot of tools at the European levels which have been mobilized to do that. And the second one is also to deliver to very high environmental and social standards. And this is important in a way for all the stakeholders, and this is where you can create a lot of alignment. It is important, of course, for a number of the financial institutions and investors like us who are financing the project. But it's equally important to the government of Jordan and the local population, because with this approach, you're having a very strong stakeholder engagement, making sure you're creating real local benefits environmentally, but also socially, and making sure they're mutual benefits. And it's a real win-win partnership also economically and socially, and that you actually, the country benefits from a lot of the impact also economically that you can build with a very, very large project like this.
Thank you. Let me turn to, again, I would have plenty of more questions, but let me turn first to Denzo. You are a key actor in the financial system in Africa, and on the, I would say both as an actor, but also as a thinker about how to mobilize investments and with some ideas. So when we're talking about Global Gateway capacity to mobilize large amounts of investment financings, that must resonate well in your ears, no? How do you see the role of Global Gateway compared to what you're trying to do or what you're doing in Africa?
Thank you very much. Real question. That's a real question, and I was quite moved by the Vice President's repetitions. Trillions, he said. Real trillions, in the trillions of dollars. And that pool of capital really only resides with what I have been described as the orphan in the development community. You know, I sat on President Macron's new Global Financial Pact Summit Finance and Private Sector Task Force. And within that entire conversation, it was all development financiers opining on how to mobilize the trillions. And then, there were some quite interesting interventions which basically explained that when the MDBs were established, they were the largest pool of finance available for governments. And of course, they therefore played a leading role, for governments. Fast forward to where we are today, you know, we are a 300+ trillion pool of institutional capital relative to a multilateral development bank system pool of less than 3 trillion, but yet we are not playing the proper role, and we're being guided and mobilized in theory by the multilateral development banking system. Now, as that relates to Africa, these tend to be words, because I think we know that the mobilization ratios are just not materializing. You know, we hear from the G20 that the private capital mobilization ratios and delivery for the development system for Africa and emerging markets and developing countries is supposed to be $10 for every $1 of development finance provided. But the reality, according to the G20 and the Capital Adequacy Framework report, is that we receive 20 to 38 cents on the dollar. And I was very enthused yesterday when I heard President Costa talk about in Europe, $1 mobilizes 15 euros, or €1 mobilizes 15 euros. So why in Africa and emerging markets and developing countries do we have to settle for 20 to 38 cents? And what damage is that really doing to development? So I think the Global Gateway has a real opportunity to change that. But I think the opportunity that it's missing, and I've been going around the conference trying to find peers. I'm not finding pension funds, I'm not finding sovereign wealth funds, I'm not finding those institutions in this room. And I really do believe in the Global Gateway. I believe in the sectors, I believe in the focus. And in fact, we have a very different view on Africa as the institutional investment community. We don't see Africa as a development case. We are long-term investors. We are elephants in some respects. We have a long-term view going forward, and we have a long-term view going backwards. And let's not forget that Africa, you know, in past centuries, used to be 14 to 15% of global GDP. So for us as the institutional investment community, we see Africa not as a development story, but as a mean reversion, which means that we can actually reposition the continent as a globally competitive investment destination. And that's really where we see the promise and the opportunity in the Global Gateway. But I would signal one caution. And this is a message that we continue to hear, but I think it falls on deaf ears. If the European Union, the European Investment Bank, the development community are serious about unlocking the true potential of the Global Gateway and mobilizing and crowding in private institutional capital, that 300 trillion pool at scale, and creating the hospitable legal and regulatory environment that it can be deployed at speed, we must stop trying to make investment developmental, and we must make development investable. I can speak for hours, but I think that phrase is really the unlock. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Shani, I saw you shaking your hands in approval. Please.
Thank you. Talking about making development investable. We're starting very simple. We're saying, let's replace diesel generation with clean energy. People are spending double in diesel what they could in solar. We all know the statistics. And we could have double-digit returns on investment. However, you'd be reaching communities at scale. The thing we often don't do, to my colleague, is create the ease of implementation. And that's why I left the mining industry to do what I do now. I had a really lovely, comfortable job. But I was frustrated, as you are, in terms of being able to see the translation of investment to people who really need it, and people who we think are poor but are spending more money than any of us relatively on just being able to survive every day. There's no reason why we cannot see those as customers. And what the opportunity for everybody in this room is to understand that those are investments if you have the right partner at scale, which is what you do when you work with institutional investors, institutions on the ground across the continent of Africa. So I am in absolute agreement, but I also think that for people in this room, it's to understand we're talking about a business opportunity. But to really make the gateway a gateway, the translation of investment also needs to include manufacturing. You need to be able to understand fit-for-purpose manufacturing. You need to understand that there's an opportunity to serve those markets across the African continent in agriculture, in water, in healthcare. These are people already spending money. Don't see it as a charity. And like I said, we only focus on double-digit returns.
Let me rebound, and it's open question to all the panels, so all the panelists, so whoever wants to pick it up. But what we hear quite often in this level of discussions is, first, if you want to mobilize at scale and you want to go for big projects, you'll go to more middle-income countries or markets that are better developed. And if you want to reach out to the poorest and the more difficult context, then you're not going to have this high leverage that we're talking about in terms of capital mobilization, but you might have greater impact on the local population. So sometimes we hear about this dichotomy between either we mobilize at scale or we have a greater impact in different levels. And the second comments that we hear quite often from financiers, at least in Europe, is that the problem is not so much to get the finance, but it's to get the good projects to invest in, that there are not enough good projects to try to invest. What is some of your, you want to, this is perhaps one of your roles as well, to provide support. What is your views on that?
One of the big gaps that we face, in addition to the finance gap and the policy gap, is what I mentioned earlier, which is the implementation gap. So if we dig a bit into what are we missing on implementation, so what makes the difference to overcome the bottlenecks, is something that may look a bit boring in these conversations, but look, it's really important, such as project design, project preparation, technical assistance, procurement, project management, localization. So these are the things that can make the difference to go from the billions to the trillions. But then we also need to look into the market failures. If we are discussing concessional finance, development finance, the crowding in of the public and private finance driven by a purpose, I think it's the neediest, not the easiest, that should be the target. And we have market failures, conflict-affected countries. Who in this room would be ready to go to Gaza, to Myanmar, to Afghanistan, to Sudan, South Sudan, Somalia tomorrow to do renewable energy? That's why it's important that we have the enabling context, but also an intent, so a purpose, making sure that the development finance and the global gateway also prioritize areas that are market failures. Another market failure, energy grids. We have a case for renewable energy. With carbon pricing, with all the transformation, there is no doubt that renewable energy is the cheapest. But when we look into the grid by definition are state-owned. How can we ask a state in Africa to do the investment on the grid, not incurring in more debt because they are already indebted, not being able to pass the cost to the consumers because they are under poverty? And how can we ask them to penetrate more, get more penetration of renewable energy without a prioritization from all of us in this room about energy grids and about storage? And finally, climate adaptation. We don't have a business case sufficiently strong for adaptation. We have a business case for mitigation. But look, if we don't invest on resilience, nothing will happen on sustainable development.
Madam Commissioner, and I'll get back to you, but Madam Commissioner, we're talking about resilience and the need to, Georgia gave the example of the electrification, but we could take the example of water. It's the same to try to provide the water supply. So how can we help it? And the second element is also quite often there is a notion of sustainability. To do something more sustainable is more costly, and that it is not necessarily affordable. Could you, perhaps also drawing on the European experience, say what is feasible and what is not feasible?
First, maybe, sorry, to Hubert. I mean, I agree with you that we need, and what we're trying to do with the Global Gateway is exactly making investments investable and seeing the link between the sustainable investment and a win-win for Team Europe and for Team Africa or whatever. This is the idea when President von der Leyen last mandate presented it. And of course, we have a lot of projects that is actually bankable, not all of them. That is the main challenge that I hear from people around the world, but also in Europe. I mean, the question you ask me is actually one question I get very often in the European context. Can we be both going toward the green transition, clean transition, and at the same time being competitive? Because, you know, Europe is focusing on being competitive. Yes, the answer is quite clear. It is possible, and it is shown in the figures. And actually, sometimes I get this, everybody doesn't know that, but I'm coming from Sweden, and people say to me, oh, it's easy for you to say coming from Sweden, you have energy, you have a lot of, it's a welfare country and so forth. But no, the industry in the northern Sweden, north of Northern Europe, but also in the whole of Europe, is doing this not because of well, of course, hopefully they're doing it for climate change also, but it is because it is a business case. So the strongest asset that Europe has at the moment is to invest in decarbonization, I would say. And that, of course, is not only due to Europe, but it's also for the globe. But also back to water, building a strong water resilience in Europe is not only important for us, it's important for the globe. And again here, I think when you talk about scale and all this, that is something that we also struggle with. We have the ideas, but we don't build the scale. So here, of course, the globe, the market is also important for European companies when it comes to the water sector.
So if it's difficult for Europe, is it possible even for the local community that you're trying to work with in terms of providing energy? And is this green energy sometimes also, you know, we've heard some elements of Europe is pushing for, with the Green Deal, forcing Africa to go green, 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 but in fact we first need to have access to energy, whatever kind of access to energy. So, Shani, what would be your approach at this level?
There's nothing about green that people in the developing world do not want. What people in the developing world, emerging markets, places I've lived in and live in need is accessible, affordable, innovative, right? But also it needs to get to people. Part of the frustration is we've been hearing conversations about mitigation, adaptation, resilience strategies, and consistently told that implementation and scaling is impossible. So we spent the time to find the sites to allow for deployment with trusted leaders. So we're working with faith groups. We have the sites available.
And the projects that are bankable for investors to come in?
Bankable projects, and your first customers is faith groups.
So why are the investors coming? Or
I'm here to talk to all of you. And the key thing here is making sure that we don't see this as charity. These are investable, bankable projects at scale that need to reach people. And it's not just about water, but yes, water, it's about energy. But those are two catalytic functions that enable economic growth, and that's where the Team Europe approach comes in terms of manufacturing, technology, agriculture, etc.
Can I just come in and say that as the investment community, we hear you, but I'm not sure that everyone in the development community cares to hear you. And I think that's the problem. When you talk about a lack of bankable projects, we are the largest institutional asset owners. Every company that's developed a green hydrogen project is in our portfolio. Every company that's developed renewable energy portfolios, projects are in our portfolio. The problem is the procurement system. We can align very specifically in Africa, which is what we're saying to a number of governments as well as the UNFCCC. Africa has $3 trillion worth of NDC potential investment needs and projects. None of those projects can be originated by the private sector. It's become a business for consultants and everyone else to write long reports and do workshops, whereas we can sit down with the government tomorrow and negotiate an institutional investor public partnership which says, which green hydrogen projects do you need? Which renewable energy projects do you need? How can we work out a better investment structure and strategy for you? And we can have the expertise that's even prepared to take the project development risk. So it's really, I think we should really focus on this point. The system is what is blocking private sector participation at scale and the mobilization of private capital. It is not that the investment community do not want to participate. And I think that's lost on too many of us when the development indicators, I mean, the investment and the financing gap keeps growing, and there's this echo chamber that says, oh, that private sector don't want to come in, we're only interested in profit, when actually our view is not only do we want to green our portfolios, but we want to green our portfolios so that they decarbonize the real economy. And when we look at just transition and adaptation and these types of things, we take a view on ESG. And we have a saying which is essentially E is the NPV of S. So you don't focus on investing in the environment while people starve and people have no livelihoods. So for us, we're very focused on climate and sustainable development has to be aligned with ambitious industrial growth. And there's a $10 trillion and growing global green industrial economy, which Africa is less than 1% of, yet we hold over 20 to 30% of all the critical minerals. We sort of see ourselves in the continent as the largest global donor because we export a lot of our value, and that is the system, and that is the reform.
But what is wrong in this? Because you mentioned the system is blocking, but what is the part of the system if one is trying to unblock it? What is the, when you say it's blocking, what would you like as an investor?
Yes.
What would you like to see in order to invest in these local community projects for green energy? You have somebody that is looking for an investment, you're an investor. What is blocking you? And perhaps the subsidiary question is, can Europe help also in some instance to unlock this system?
I think we need to create investable asset classes and move away from the episodic project by project bureaucracy. And the Honourable Commissioner made the point. I mean, you know, when we look at climate and mobilizing private capital, you know, I'll be in Berlin in a couple of weeks at the Global Infrastructure Conference. Last year, everyone was lamenting about Fit for 55. The governments are telling us as investors and project developers, this needs to be done by 2030. And then it takes 7 years to get a wind farm permit. So that's the type of anomaly that we're dealing with here, and we need to be able to reconcile that. They say that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, the problem is we have a culture that wants to wait 7 years to give a permit, and then on the other hand insist that you must do the project yesterday. And I think we need to be able to reconcile those things. There's a philosophical divide between the role of institutional capital in development and the reality of private capital mobilization. And until we address that, and I think the good news is the Global Gateway completely, by its selection of the industries, its geographical comprehensiveness, and its newfound or current role to become a champion in the global green industrial economy, the time is now. And I think Team Africa and Team Europe have an opportunity. But the last thing I'll say on Team Europe is that, you know, we were in Angola in November at the EU-Africa Heads of State meeting. Prior to that, we met in Addis Ababa around September for the Africa Climate Summit. We sat down in a round table with European government leaders, with African government leaders, and we said, Team Europe should not just be development finance and governments. It should be development finance institutions, European governments, and the $33 trillion representation of the European institutional investment community. And that is the difference. Otherwise, there's no math that can mobilize or crowd in that capital. And I think those are the simple realities. This is not a complicated issue.
Matthew, I see you smiling, and you are a European global investor. So what is your take on, first, do you work with institutional investors? Do you find enough bankable projects? And do you also recognize this blockage from the system that prevents from large-scale investments?
So we do work with institutional investors. They're the ones who are providing capital, so the insurance companies, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds. And since we're the last panel of the day, I think we can also go towards a message, a positive message of where it works. And looking at, to your point and to your question you were asking, are there enough investable or bankable projects? To some extent, of course, a number of these projects are unlocked, not necessarily for affordability. The affordability is because people are paying a lot for basic services. So the affordability may be there, but they're blocked for a number of reasons. We see our mission as unlocking these projects in a way, as really unlocking them. And so I can give you an example, again, from the water sector. I don't have anything against the others. It's just I've been spending a lot of time on one of these projects, so we get a little bit geeky and obsessive about these things. For our project in Jordan, of course, you have to build this alignment of stakeholders and you have to unlock the different projects. So you have to build, in a way, a coalition. One of it is on the financial side. So we do have a full blended finance structure. We have donor capital. We have a big group of development finance institutions, including the European ones. All this is allowing us to crowd in private capital, which is the equity which we're investing in there, which is equity coming from insurance pension funds who are coming on a commercial basis as an investable proposition.
And the reason why this is local, sorry for interrupting you, but you also have global, but you also have local pension funds and
also local pension funds as well. This is always an alignment that we try to build, and also global investors. So bringing in both, and bringing in global investors is also important for us because we want. It's a way to achieve scale, and it's also a way to ensure these investments are sustainable, that they're not seen as an expenditure, but as an investment which you can replicate and scale up. And so this is one of the key benefits of this whole blended finance structure and approach, is to be able to do this. But this also means we're not just bringing capital, we're also bringing a know-how and an expertise to unlock these projects. And we don't do this on our own, but we have to lead this process. And again, it's also very much about partnerships. So of course, in the first instance, the partnership with the government, which is very supportive. But also, for example, in the example of our Aqaba Amman project, we're benefiting from the fact that EIB had financed and led an environmental social assessment study a few years ago. So we're not starting from scratch, and that whole timeline is accelerated by that. So it's very much about how we can kind of build these coalitions and with players, and I think this is what Global Gateway is about. And once you have that right alignment, you can actually unlock these projects and deliver them.
But at the same time, at the European level, we hear a lot of European financiers saying that it is risky to invest in Africa, and that there is perhaps not enough support to accompany them to do some of their investments. So, and you know, I was mentioning in my introductory remarks also this notion that at the European level, there is also a greater focus on win-win. So what is good for the partners, but also what is good for us. If we think from the European perspective, how to bring in better the European financiers as well, and could there be some development of asset class and portfolio type of approaches? Because investors are quite often those we talk to, and I'm sure there are many also in the room, are saying they can work with the EIB or with development financiers, but they find that to go on their own, it is quite onerous, quite difficult, and not project by project. The transaction costs are too high. What are your experience at Meridiam on trying to do that, and what would be your advice to both the European system to try to accompany and to the European financiers?
What we've seen and what we've been able to deliver in a number of sectors and countries is, in a way, unlocking the first projects or a series of projects, whether 2 or 3 hospitals, 2 or 3 solar farms in a country, and in a way showing the way starting from the ground, from the bottom up. And once you've done that, you've in a way created a bit of an ecosystem with showing the way by showing what an investable structure can look like. Also, in a way, bringing capacity on the ground, but also in the advisory groups who are kind of supporting these projects, and also in the supply chain, showing for contractors what it takes to actually deliver these projects and helping them understand and access these markets and building local capacity. So in a way, we'll do perhaps a few Pathfinder projects, and then the local market and also other global players will kind of continue developing the pipeline. And so we're creating our own competition, but that's also one of the benefits that we're creating is creating a supply chain. So we have many examples of having done the first projects in a country, and then there's a whole pipeline that follows.
Can I just jump in there, sir?
Perhaps just, if you allow me, I just would like to go to Madam Commissioner. Because you mentioned, Madam Commissioner, that there was also, you encountered also some of these challenges working at the European level. So are there some lessons in trying to attract financiers to address the water resilience, since that was your example, at the European level, that you find was successful within Europe and that could help also in the engagement at the international level?
First, I would like to say, yes, it's not only water, I'm also as obsessed with you in water, and I think for many good reasons. But I mean, also investing in nature, in the soil, is also important, not only for, again, back to Europe, but also for the world. So I think here. So, yes, I mean, if I go to the water resilience strategy, we put forward a water accelerator platform. I mean, because we also need to gather access to capital in Europe. And, in Europe we have a lot of capital, but sometimes it's very stuck, it doesn't really move. We need to, so there's another colleague of mine, Marie-Louise Albuquerque, who is working with trying to focus on getting the bank, saving and bank union, getting it to work, so to say. So that is one thing that is important, and of course that will have beneficial also for other things. So, but back to the water, I meet a lot of water companies who say that, of course, their interest is, of course, to sell a lot, but not only in Europe. But going back to the desalination plants, of course, it's the same techniques in Cyprus or in Jordan or in Africa. So, of course, it's a big. It's a joint way forward, and that is what I think. I'm very happy when you say it's opportunity here. That is, of course, something that European companies could gather from. So yes and no, there are things to learn from Europe, but also I think also we can learn from others. So I think that is the main thing. But we are working together to find new solutions also on the private capital, because back to Europe, and we know the gap of investments, whether it's water, whether it's nature, whether it's climate adaptation. It's huge, and of course we need to put public money in this, but it will never ever be enough. So we also need the private capital. And here, of course, we are looking into new solutions like nature credits, working with the EIB on different solutions, so and other developing banks.
Thank you. Hubert, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, I worry that we're just overcomplicating all of this. The best architects of asset classes, it's not a development finance institution and a multilateral sort of political body. Venture capital was established by an asset owner. Infrastructure was established by Canadian pension funds. Responsible investment as a multi-trillion-dollar asset class was established by Norwegian asset owners. I think you need to see the institutional investment community as a very strong partner in being able to develop these asset classes, because I don't think that asset owners could come in and design development products. That's your expertise. And I think as we're all trying to save the planet and see nature as a globally competitive investable asset class, which is increasingly becoming because of the global ecosystem services that it generates and delivers on a widespread basis, I think the partnership with the institutional investment community, I think if you had Norges and a number of the other asset owners coming and working with the Commission, coming and working with the European Investment Bank, as opposed to the European Investment Bank trying to figure out how do we de-risk, you only get a very small part of the market. And to your point, there is a perception of risk. And I raised this question yesterday.
You mentioned that yesterday, yeah, exactly.
I raised the question yesterday. I've been raising it for 10 years, which is the European Investment Bank hosts the Global Emerging Markets Database. That database has been proven, and we've been asking for access to that data as the institutional investment community so we can properly assess the risk so that we can potentially increase or adjust our allocations to emerging markets and developing countries. Each year, that database is not being shared. It's costing emerging market and developing country governments $15.6 billion each year on excess interest on loans. But it's not being democratized. The G20 heads of state insisted and mandated the GEMS consortium to democratize access to that data for investors, risk takers, credit rating agencies. And there's now research which basically shows that over the last 2 decades, for the global institutional portfolios, because we haven't had access to that data, we've been overpricing emerging markets risk and we've been under-allocating. That backtesting data showed that $6 trillion has been wiped off of global institutional portfolios for the lack of access to that data. Now, democratizing access to that data is a costless exercise. It costs nothing. With technology today, that could be done in 1 month, and the lawyers could very quickly figure out all of the confidentiality arrangements around that data. And, you know, it's a costless exercise, and it's not being done. And it has priceless impact if it is, because it reduces the borrowing costs and it unlocks this private capital at scale because it addresses the perception of risk. So I think what the World Trade Organization Director General said yesterday, we need trust. And because that database is not being shared, there's a grave, growing lack of trust, which erodes the ability for governments and private sector to endear towards the global gateway, because we think if you can't do that, if you can't do something that's costless, that will help us save money, grow and develop and become more competitive, then what's the point of putting 300 billion on the table that is difficult to get access to?
And I think you got the answer yesterday that they're working on it, and I think
10
also
years.
the EIB. But I'm not trying here to defend the EIB. I'm just saying for those who were not listening to the answer yesterday that was given to you, that they are working on trying to make it more transparent. Brishani, you wanted to react very briefly, and then we will also go to Georgia, and then we'll go to the questions.
I've been trying to hold myself to my seat and avoid jumping up and down a lot. When we talk about simplicity, it reminds me of a conversation that I had in the Eastern Cape in South Africa with a community after doing a big conversation around investment for a due diligence exercise. And a lady came to me who's a farmer and a mother and said to me, I didn't quite understand the whole conversation, but after you guys do what you want to do, will I be able to buy school shoes and soap? I just want you to think about that for a moment. She's a consumer who's spending money, who's invested in a farm, and all of this conversation doesn't mean anything to her. So when we're making these decisions, taking into consideration what Mr. Dans has said about recalibrate your notion of risk, but also understand that when we want to really simplify, then you do what my brother Matthew said, go and actually start the investments, right? So for simplicity needs to be simple. We can't keep on adding to. If you want to make investments to ensure ecosystem services, provide the clean energy, sun, wind, hydro, right? We don't need to prove these models anymore. We all have the science. But to enable it, start the investments. And I will acknowledge, to your point about the EIB, having people like me in the room is a huge start. I have spent my time being able to bring the stories. My stories are not my stories. My stories are of those women across the continent that are consumers, that are wanting investment to enable trade with Europe.
Yes, and it seems that indeed there are in many developing countries absolutely huge potential for consumption. So from the outside, it seems that it would be a no-brainer to try to stimulate investment in such region. Georgia, these are the kind of conversations you have been involved quite a lot in general. What can be done to try to facilitate also, including on these alignments of local actors, to try to facilitate external investments?
One of the most important things I think would be important and very often we overlook that because we tend to talk about the speed meter on the spending, is to focus on demand. So what are we trying to fix? Who are we serving? We are serving those in need. And that's why it's very important that all these conversations are based on the need that is provided to those that can't get it through a normal market. Because I guess that what the discussion today on Global Gateway, or any discussion that is about concessional finance or with some kind of purpose, is based on the assumption that there are contexts that won't get the access to the finance. And access,
this is what we're seeing in practice.
Without an intent. And that's why I think it's really important to ask developing countries, what do you need? And what's your strategy? Rather than defining how much are we providing on finance. Let me give you one example. Sierra Leone. It's a good example on Global Gateway. Sierra Leone have 6% of their population in rural areas with access to electricity, and 36% of the population with access to electricity. Global Gateway, the EU asked us, UNOPS, to partner in the development of mini-grids, microgrids powered by solar. It's concrete. And it's something that is driven by Sierra Leone. It was Sierra Leone saying, I need this. It was Sierra Leone designing the project. It was Sierra Leone that then came to the EU and said, can you finance? And then the EU brought us to do the implementation. And this is very important, that we don't pretend that it's a supply to frame the demand. It's the demand that frames the supply. And I'm sorry that very often I think that we are overlooking this.
That's true, but with the SDGs, we also know that the needs are huge and that we are not meeting the SDGs, and we are missing them by trillions of dollars. So this is this notion of putting just the needs are super important, but the question is how to respond with the investments that can come to try to respond to these needs, but probably the notions of what is it for the local investors, what is it for the international investors, to make it bankable so that these needs will be able to be met by also private finance and not only by public. I guess that's the notions of what we're trying to get. We have just a few minutes left. If there are some questions in the audience. Yes, please. Just wait for the microphone.
Ignacio Corlasoli from CAF, Latin American Development Bank, Latin American Caribbean Development Bank. I want to go a question into, I think Hubert mentioned a lot. I mean, we work a lot on Global Gateway, a lot with the EIB colleagues as well, and other European IFIs. But I want to know more about instruments. That's something that hasn't been in detail made in this discussion. And Hubert, you mentioned it. But what kind of instrument would you see in the Global Gateway? Financial instruments, of course. And of course, I mean, I missed Latin America and the Caribbean in the conversation.
What kind of, if I understood you correctly, you're asking me what type of instruments have we seen within the Global Gateway?
To mobilize investment?
New financial instruments.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I think the first thing is to set the table and create the platform, which is essentially creating the asset class. Once you've created an asset class, you then create an industry of fund managers and all sorts of market-driven instrument origination and design. And I think that's yet to happen. I think we heard from the European insurance industry yesterday, and they described, which I don't fully disagree with, they described the Global Gateway as a great vision, but it actually hasn't quite boiled down itself and proven which instruments are going to be the most effective for it to accomplish its objective. I think it stays within the sort of the classical institutional allocation related, debt, equity, and all these different instruments that can fit within the profile of what we have a fiduciary mandate to be able to invest in. But I think we should have that humility where institutional investors do not pretend that we can do development finance, and perhaps development finance shouldn't pretend that it can do institutional mobilization, but yet we partner together. And I think the Global Gateway is an excellent platform. To me, Global Gateway becomes unavoidable when it partners with the European institutional investment community to do exactly what you're talking, design products, to have mobilization strategies, and create the de-risking instruments and the credit enhancements that can help Europe become a global force. Because the reality is Africa does not sit at the table. Europe will not sit at the table without the global gateway. And we need Team Africa and Team Europe to ensure that we're not on the menu. And I think that is the plea here. That's where we really need to be able to come together and co-design these instruments. Thank you.
Mathieu, yeah, that's a nice call, by the way, to think, and I think that's in the spirit of the win-win partnerships of the actors, not Europe providing solutions for Africa or for Latin America, but to work with the local actors. Mathieu?
One of the interesting things we found about Global Gateway is there's less focus on the instruments, recognizing a number of the instruments are there already and can be activated, and more focus on really what are the outcomes that we want to achieve, focusing on some of these outcomes, aligning all the stakeholders in there with the existing stakeholders with the instruments, whether development or donors, et cetera, but also investors and private sector. So really deliberately and intentionally bring in the private sector and really aligning all those around these outcomes. And I think this is where this element of prioritization, intentionality, and direction is really pushing everyone in the same direction. And if you take all the instruments and all the stakeholders, public and private sector, development finance community, and align them around some key objectives, then you can really achieve pretty impressive things in that scale.
Any last comment by any of the panelists? We have 30 seconds left, so...
We've made it easy. We have a $3 billion portfolio across several countries where you have a safe partner in the Catholic Church that's wanting to work across religious groups. We have a portfolio approach. We've got initial projects. We're taking an ecosystem services approach. What's stopping you? Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Madam Commissioner, the last words.
No, thank you very much for a very interesting for a panel and listening to all. I would say I see opportunities here, and that is a big thing for all of us. I mean, we didn't mention the word bioeconomy, but I wrote it down when someone of you said something. So I think here's creating growth, creating security, creating resilience in the same time. So I just think that taking this opportunity and go to action, of course, is the most important thing.
Well, that's fantastic. We end up this very stimulating discussion on a positive note on the fact that there are opportunities we can work together. And in fact, Global Gateway is not something static. It's something that is supposed to build on the dynamics of the partner countries. And it's something that is evolving, so we can be hopeful. Thank you very much for the EIB for giving us this opportunity to have this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, San. Thank you very much for that lovely panel discussion. So we're nearly there. It's only up to our final closing remarks. Thank you so much for being a part of this Forum 2026. And as mentioned this morning, you will have all of the details, some remarks on all of the panel sessions from the EIB emailed to you at about 1 o'clock this afternoon. So that's in just 20 minutes' time. Please keep the noise down in the room because we do have our closing remarks now. And I really do encourage you not to talk in this room, please. I know it's very exciting and you really want to talk to each other, but there's plenty of opportunity in the sunshine in just 5 minutes. Mikolaj Dovlievsky, no, give me another attempt. Dovlievich. Mikolaj Dovlievich.
Yes, Lisa was exposed this time to some Polish difficult names, I know. The astronaut and now me. I'm sorry about this. Ladies and gentlemen, so I have a very difficult task because I know my job is not to make sure the food does not get cold before you can get out of this room. Very briefly, Vice President, ladies and gentlemen, we reached the end of the 4th EIB Group Forum. I want to thank you for your participation and intense discussions inside the room, outside the room. 3 days on a range of topics. It's really difficult to summarize. I just want to share with you some key points, I think, that are staying in my head. Of course, the current geopolitical wars, shocks, instability, risks make us think that strategic autonomy is no longer optional for Europe. I think the last 3 days show that we know what needs to be done. To be honest, after having seated here since Tuesday, we cannot pretend that we don't know what needs to be done. I think we need the capacity to choose, to absorb shocks, to protect citizens, and to remain a global reliable partner within an open and resilient single market. What is central to our ambitions is competitiveness. Europe does not lack talent, innovation, or capital. The challenge is scaling them up and transform savings into productive investments, particularly in innovation, clean technologies, digitalization, health, and defense. Initiatives which were mentioned here, like TechEU, ETCI2, venture capital scaling, deeper capital markets integration, are essential. Equally important is simplification, and I take the quote from the last panel: simplification is simple. What don't you understand? So I think it's important, and in one particular context, I just want to say, I think it is clear that we need to make sure that companies that were founded, that were born in Europe, stay and prosper in Europe. Energy transition is a win-win for climate and competitiveness. Reducing dependence on fossil fuels means more security while creating jobs and industrial leadership. Investments in health, housing, skills, gender equality, youth, and regional development are not just a luxury or a cost, but they are investments in productive infrastructure of our future. Europe's global role is not built on power alone, but on shared values and partnerships. I think that we have heard a consistent message. Europe grows stronger by building bridges. Through climate cooperation, global health, trade, and development finance, Europe's credibility comes from being a reliable, rules-based partner. And multilateralism is not a constraint, but a force multiplier. We all have to focus on delivery. The strategies and financial tools already exist, and the challenge is execution. Winston Churchill actually once said that it's fine to have beautiful strategy, but it's actually very good to look at results occasionally. And I think we have seen some good results in Europe, and Europe has proven through crises that when we act decisively and together, we can deliver. I think Europe has been compared to many things in the past. One comparison I would like to use, since we are next to the beautiful Luxembourg Philharmonie, which is one of the best things in Luxembourg, one of the best concert halls in Europe, I think I can dare to compare Europe also to an orchestra. It is clear that you can have the best musicians in the world, but if they tune separately, the result is just a lot of noise. They have to listen to each other and play together, and then it becomes music. I think this very well can apply also to Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like now to take the moment to thank everyone who helped to make this forum a successful and insightful event. First of all, a big thank you to our speakers and moderators whose knowledge and enthusiasm shaped the discussions. Many thanks to our Master of Ceremony, Lisa, for steering us so smoothly through the program. To everyone here in the room, thank you for joining us. Your engagement and energy really brought the forum to life. We hope you leave today with new ideas, new connections, and plenty of inspiration. I would also like to thank those who followed the forum online. We are very grateful that you could join us even from a distance. A special word of thanks goes to the organizing team. Your commitment and careful preparation behind the scenes made all of this possible. And in particular, I'd like to acknowledge our protocol and events team, including Christelle, who is standing there, here on my right, who did a fantastic job of keeping everything running smoothly. While this fourth edition of the forum is coming to an end, I'm very pleased to share with you that we will be back next year with the next edition. So let me wish you a very safe travel home, and thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you so much, Mikolaj. There is nothing left for me to add. I just want to echo that it has been an honor to be with you for the last 3 days. You're the marathon winners. You deserve gold medals and a lovely lunch. And and I also want to echo that my job has been made easy because the team is just so wonderful. Thank you again to the team here from the EIB and, of course, to the tech team. They are always in black and hidden, but without them, you would have no sound, no lighting, no stage. So thank you to them also. And have a wonderful return to wherever you're returning to. Thank you.